Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kimberly Antonakos. Kimberly Antonakos was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in her family. Although she grew up in love and wealth, her father, Thomas, founded his own computer company. When Kimberly was young, her parents divorced. Kimberly left to live with her mother, and she still kept in touch with her father. Her father Thomas spent weekends taking Kimberly out and spending all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, she was faced with a difficult choice: to stay with her mother or her father. Since she did not want to leave her familiar environment, Kimberly decided to live with her father Thomas. Kim began living with Thomas. Kimberly grew up to be a well-behaved and sociable child. Over the years, Kimberly became a beautiful and humorous girl. In 1994, Kimberly began attending the College of Staten Island. At that time, she informed her father that she felt she was old enough to live on her own. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was worried about this decision but still praised her and decided not to object. Instead, Thomas promised to ensure that Kimberly had a safe place of her own. Her father Thomas bought an apartment for Kimberly in a wealthy area of the city. He also installed an alarm system for the apartment to ensure Kimberly's safety. To avoid having to park far from home, Thomas bought a parking space in the garage across the street. He also bought Kimberly a cell phone and a pager so they could stay in touch regularly. Kimberly works as an accountant at a company. She lives a normal life like other students, often participating in entertainment activities and parties. Although her father Thomas repeatedly asked her to return to live with him, Kimberly insisted on being independent. In early 1995, Kimberly's best friend Liz Pace's house was being renovated. Liz, along with her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their young son, came to Kimberly's house to ask for temporary accommodation. Out of kindness, Kimberly agreed to let Liz Pace's family stay. One day, Kimberly and Liz decided to go to a party. They got their makeup done, their hair done, and their outfits picked out. Afterwards, they had a great time and danced at the party. When the party was over, Kimberly drove Liz home in her 1994 white Honda Accord. However, Kimberly did not go up to the apartment with Liz because she had unfinished business. The two girls hugged and said goodbye. Liz returned to the apartment first. The next morning, when Kimberly did not show up for work, her co-workers contacted her father, Thomas, to inform him that Kimberly had not shown up for work. Kimberly's absence was unusual because she was always on time. Thomas was also unable to reach his daughter on her cell phone, which made him feel worried and had a bad feeling. Thomas decided to contact Kimberly's friends. However, no one had any information about where she had gone after leaving the party early in the morning of March 1st. When Thomas did not hear from her friends, Thomas decided to go to the police to report the incident. The police thought that Kimberly might have stayed at a friend's house overnight and would return soon, so they advised him to wait at least 24 hours. However, Thomas was not satisfied. He decided to conduct an investigation himself to find Kimberly. After learning of Kimberly's disappearance, Kimberly's mother met with a psychic after being introduced by a friend. Upon seeing Kimberly's photo, the psychic said that she was alive, but very weak and dehydrated. She also said that Kimberly had been kidnapped by acquaintances and that Kimberly had tried to escape several times. She added that the danger came from several people and that one of them had a name that started with the letter J, and that this person was apparently the leader of the gang. Thomas, Kimberly's father, went to the places his daughter frequented and talked to many people, but did not get any important information. Thomas went to Kimberly's apartment and garage to check. When entering Kimberly's apartment, Thomas noticed a bright object lying on the floor near the wall. It turned out to be a small gold earring. Thomas remembered that he had given Kimberly this pair of earrings. Thomas put the earring in his pocket. After checking, Kimberly was not in the apartment either. Thomas only met Kimberly's best friend Liz and her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their 2-year-old child. Thomas knew about Kimberly letting Liz's family stay temporarily. But Thomas did not support this decision. When Thomas talked about Kimberly's situation, Liz's family was surprised and worried about Kimberly's disappearance. Joshua reported that he was looking for Kimberly and volunteered to help. Thomas then went to the police station a second time and insisted that they conduct a search. The police agreed to help him and began an investigation. The police began to investigate the date of Kimberly's disappearance on February 28. It was found that Kimberly went to college in the morning, then went to work. After work, Kimberly went home and had dinner. She then attended a party with Liz and returned home around 4 a.m. Kimberly then went to the parking lot, but the reason she was there at such an early hour is still unclear. Kimberly's bank account was also investigated. The police discovered that Kimberly had last used her bank card the evening before she went missing. The police assumed that Kimberly had been kidnapped. Due to the lack of concrete evidence, the police looked into the information that Kimberly's mother had received from the psychic. Witness interviews were then conducted. The first people interviewed were Liz and Joshua. The police discovered that a total of 65 calls had been made from Kimberly's phone on the morning of March 1st. This surprised the police because of the large number of calls. However, Joshua explained that he had called all of his friends and acquaintances to find out where Kimberly had gone and why she had not stayed home overnight. Joshua said that he considered Kimberly to be like a sister to him. Thanks to Liz's testimony, the police were able to identify the clothes that Kimberly was wearing. A portrait of her has been drawn and will be released to help in the search. In addition, the police have also noticed some distinctive tattoos on Kimberly's body. One of them is a scorpion, which corresponds to her zodiac sign. The other tattoo is located on her waist and represents the infinity sign in the form of two naked people parallel to each other. A search for the missing car has been launched. The police have checked all scrap yards and other places where the car could be dismantled for parts or sold. However, this search has not yielded any positive results. The police have advised Thomas to pay attention to letters and phone calls he receives, as it is possible that his daughter's kidnappers will contact Thomas and offer a ransom. At around 2 a.m. on March 4th, the emergency services received a report of a fire. A large abandoned house was on fire at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Fire crews were called in to put out the fire. When the fire was finally extinguished, firefighters found a charred body in the basement of the building. Forensic experts revealed that the deceased was a young woman between the ages of 20 and 25. Some of her long black hair was still on her head. There were also traces of tape. The woman's legs were tied tightly, and her hands were tied behind her back. However, the worst part was that she was still alive when the fire broke out, as evidenced by her lungs filled with smoke. In fact, the young woman had been brutally burned alive. Police suspect that the body may be that of Kimberly, who had gone missing. However, dental records need to be examined to confirm the identity. At the same time, experts have also analyzed the ashes to determine the victim's identity. When the autopsy was done, experts found no other traces besides the body. However, they found tattoos that matched the description of the missing woman. Records from the dental clinic also confirmed that this was how Kimberly Antonakos' body was found. A witness to the fire reported that he often walked his dog. However, the pet had been behaving strangely every time it passed the house. After the fire and the discovery of the body, it was discovered what had attracted the dog's attention. Kimberly tried to free herself and call for help. The dog had heard sounds coming from the basement thanks to its sensitive hearing, while humans cannot perceive it. When the police questioned the homeowner, it turned out that he had put the house up for sale and had been monitoring its condition through letters and receipts. However, this man had not checked the basement, only the house from the outside. The police decided to question Joshua again because they still had many unanswered questions about him. Notably, they also noticed an interesting coincidence that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua revealed to them about a friend who had not been contacted on the day Kimberly went missing. It was a young Russian man nicknamed Psycho who had a romantic relationship with Kimberly. The police decided to verify the information about this person and learned that Psycho was a Russian citizen who moved to the United States as a child and that he later joined a gang and repeatedly broke the law. Thus, a suspicious suspect appeared and was soon arrested. During the interrogation, Psycho said that he knew about Kimberly's death. His reaction shocked the police because Psycho insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime, but also showed deep sorrow. It seems he is experiencing real emotions. After investigation, Psycho's alibi was confirmed. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. Kimberly's family decided to seek help from a psychic once again. This time, the psychic said she saw 4 people involved in the case. She also said that the kidnappers wanted to contact the family but were unable to do so. The abduction initially showed no signs of a tragic ending. Thomas then announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest of the perpetrators. Thomas could not forget the psychic's words. He began to think about what she had said about the kidnappers wanting to contact the family. He wondered what that meant and what was stopping them from doing so. When he returned home, Thomas remembered a small detail from the day Kimberly went missing. Thomas had listened to all the answering machine recordings because he hoped Kimberly would contact him. However, there was no voicemail except for 2 blank messages. When he turned them on, he heard nothing, just silence on the other end of the phone. Thomas mistook them for a technical malfunction or a communication problem. 5 days after Kimberly's body was discovered, the police found her car. It was parked in a quiet part of town, near the crime scene. The police hoped to find fingerprints in the car, but unfortunately the car had been washed. The only traces left in the car were a few strands of Kimberly's hair and an earring. During this time, Thomas was implicated in a local mafia hit. Some members of Thomas's crew even blamed him for their daughter's death, as if Thomas's dark actions had caused Kimberly's troubles. However, Thomas denied any involvement. The police investigated this information through their own channels but found no evidence to confirm it. Thomas did not appear to have had anything to do with the incident and continued his business openly. In July 1995, a young man was arrested by police at a New York City home for burglary. However, during questioning, he provided information related to Kimberly's case. The detainee claimed that he had heard from an acquaintance that his friends had kidnapped and then burned the girl alive. When the police learned that the man was Joshua Torres, who lived in Kimberly's apartment and had been involved in the search for her, they decided to take a closer look at Joshua Torres. Joshua was asked to come in for questioning and he denied any involvement in the incident. However, during a lengthy conversation, he made a confession. Joshua said that if he had really been the kidnapper, he would have fed Kimberly. This intrigued the police because there was no information given that Kimberly had died of hunger, thirst, or cold. Only the police knew this information. The police needed more evidence to clear up the case. After investigating, they discovered that Joshua Torres had a criminal record. Furthermore, he had no job and was living off Liz. Meanwhile, Liz worked to support both of them. Joshua took care of the child and had free time to secretly plan the crime. Joshua followed Kimberly and learned her habits, and kidnapped Kimberly and hid her in an abandoned house. But surprisingly, Joshua did not ask for ransom. During the investigation, the calls Joshua made that morning were analyzed. The results showed that Joshua had lied when he said he called Kimberly's friends and acquaintances. But when checked, most of the phone numbers were from random people who had nothing to do with Kimberly. When checking Joshua's pager data, the police discovered that Joshua had sent several strange messages on March 1st. These evidences gradually closed the circle around Joshua Torres. Finally, the police had a solid lead to arrest Joshua. When the police told Joshua that they no longer considered Kimberly's ex-boyfriend a suspect, Joshua changed his story. Joshua said that he suspected his friends of murdering Kimberly. Joshua confessed to assisting in the kidnapping. Joshua said he did not think Joshua's accomplices would decide to kill Kimberly. According to Joshua, they only wanted to demand ransom and release Kimberly, but the plan failed. When the kidnappers could not contact Thomas, even recorded a ransom message. However, for some reason, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers were angry that Thomas did not respond. The kidnappers were scared because the psychic said that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was released to the media and broadcast on TV. After speaking with the police, Joshua was released on bail and then disappeared. At the same time, Joshua's accuser, Jose, was shot in the back of the head while he was with his wife. Jose's wife later admitted to the police that her husband did not trust Joshua, used a tape recorder when talking to Joshua, and wanted to expose him. Police were able to establish details of the kidnapping and the crime through pager messages and statements from the suspects. The case involved 4 suspects: Joshua Torres, Julio Negrin, another man named Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett. It is worth noting that Julio had dated Kimberly and even intended to marry her. However, Kimberly rejected his proposal. Nicholas had just been released from prison before the kidnapping took place thanks to a bond from his mother. Nicholas had planned the incident while serving a prison sentence for serious crimes. Joshua had a criminal record dating back to his youth, including kidnapping and the legal use of weapons. A kidnapping had taken place, in which Joshua was the mastermind. Joshua directed the actions of the kidnapping group. When Kimberly returned from a party, the group of men attacked her in the parking lot. They had apparently been watching and waiting for Kimberly to be alone. To control Kimberly, they used guns to threaten Kimberly and force her to be quiet. They then tied Kimberly's hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. The group then put Kimberly in the trunk of their car and drove her to an abandoned house. There, they took Kimberly into the basement and tied her to a chair. They also took off Kimberly's shoes to prevent her from making noise by tapping her feet. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed money and that they would release her when the money was paid. One of the kidnappers, Julio, was assigned to take care of her, bringing her food and water twice a day and keeping her warm. However, Julio left the house because he was afraid of the consequences. So, for 3 days, Kimberly had no food, no water, and was freezing. Immediately after kidnapping Kimberly, the kidnappers notified Joshua, who then demanded a ransom of $775,000 via an audio message. Joshua then called Thomas and left 2 empty audio messages. Therefore, Thomas ignored these calls. The kidnappers were waiting for a message from Thomas, but they did not understand why Thomas did not contact them. During this time, Kimberly was left alone and fainted several times due to dehydration, but Kimberly still managed to survive. The kidnappers did not receive the ransom and were afraid of being caught, so they decided to release Kimberly. When they went down to the basement, they found Kimberly unconscious. They thought Kimberly was dead and decided to get rid of all the evidence, including the hostage. The police knew that Joshua had directed the actions of his accomplices from inside the house, so Liz did not know that Joshua had kidnapped Kimberly. At the trial, Liz said that after being questioned, Joshua came to her and confessed everything. Joshua then beat her and threatened to kill her before fleeing. Some time after the massacre, the police investigated Jose. He was also suspected of being involved in Kimberly's murder, but there was no direct evidence. Therefore, the police decided to take statements from the kidnappers. When questioning Joshua, he denied all involvement in the case. However, Julio decided to cooperate and gave an honest statement about the incident. Information from Julio allowed Joshua's role in the case to be determined, and Joshua was charged with Kimberly's murder. Therefore, Joshua, Julio, and Nicholas were charged with related crimes such as murder, kidnapping, and vandalism. At the trial, after more than 10 hours of debate, Joshua was finally sentenced to life in prison for 58 years, the same sentence that Nicholas Brett also received. Julio Negrin was convicted of complicity and sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison after the incident. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was pleased with the court's decision, because Thomas did not want criminals to be sentenced to death. In his eyes, the death penalty was not the most severe punishment. Nicholas experienced abuse and assault in prison many times, and after only 2 years of incarceration, Nicholas died of AIDS. Meanwhile, Julio was released after 2 years after completing his sentence. However, Joshua is still serving a longer sentence and cannot be released until 2053 at the earliest, if he is still alive at that time. In 2005, Thomas died of cancer. His family believes that Kimberly's death caused Thomas a lot of stress, and that cancer was part of that. The life of Kimberly Antonakos, a beautiful girl, ended suddenly and tragically. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Corey Richens. Eric Richens was born on May 13, 1982, and had a profound impact on the lives of those around him. Throughout his childhood and teenage years, Eric was fiercely passionate about sports, excelling in basketball, baseball, and soccer, which reflected his dedication to staying active. His true love, however, was anything that took him outdoors, particularly hunting, where his exceptional marksmanship and keen eye earned him numerous trophies from around the world. Eric was renowned for his dynamic personality, which radiated joy and laughter wherever he went. He possessed a natural talent for telling stories, playing harmless pranks on friends, and contagious laughter that would light up the room. Eric was undoubtedly the life of every party, leaving a lasting impression on everyone he met. Eric, a Utah resident, possessed an extensive collection of motorized vehicles, including trucks, four-wheelers, and snowmobiles, which he used to explore the outdoors and satisfy his thirst for adventure. Although he loved having fun, Eric was deeply committed to his faith and was an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With the encouragement of his family, he volunteered for a 2-year mission trip to Mexico City, where he honed his Spanish language skills. Upon completing high school, Eric pursued higher education at the University of Utah, graduating in 2009 with a bachelor's degree in international studies and a minor in Spanish. Eric met Corey Darden at Home Depot, where she was an employee. As a regular customer due to his construction work, Eric developed a friendly connection with Corey over time. He was attracted to her charm and beauty, but was too shy to approach her directly. So Eric asked a friend to help him get her contact information. One day, while Eric's friend was shopping at Home Depot, he casually asked Corey for her phone number, mentioning Eric's interest in getting to know her better. Appreciative of his friend's help, Eric anxiously waited to hear back. It was now up to Eric to make the next move, and he finally summoned the courage to call Corey, arranging their first in-person meeting. Unbeknownst to him, this meeting would alter his life forever. From the moment Eric and Corey met, they clicked. Their connection was undeniable, and their first date marked the start of a romantic journey. As they introduced each other to their families, their bond grew stronger. Corey's mother and brothers instantly took to Eric, while Eric's family was equally impressed by Corey's kind nature and how well she fitted in with him. Although Eric's sisters, Katie and Amy, were initially cautious, they soon warmed up to Corey and made her feel part of their family. Eric and Corey tied the knot in 2013 with a private wedding ceremony. 2 years later, Corey gave birth to their first child, Carter, and later Ashton, and finally Weston, completing their family of 5. Eric proved to be a natural at fatherhood, and his sons looked up to him with admiration. He was exceedingly proud of his boys, celebrating their every achievement, whether it was academic, in sports, or in the arts, and was always present to cheer them on and congratulate them on their accomplishments. Eric eventually launched a stonemasonry business which proved extremely successful. His exceptional craftsmanship and meticulous attention to detail set him apart, attracting clients seeking his expertise in crafting stunning stonework. The thriving business brought financial security to Eric and his family. Meanwhile, Corey's real estate ventures also generated a significant income. Her entrepreneurial drive and in-depth knowledge of the local market made her a vital contributor to their family's growing prosperity. She would buy homes, renovate them, and sell them at a profit. As a result, the Richens family built considerable wealth, and their lifestyle embodied the pinnacle of success. On the surface, the Richens family seemed to have a perfect life. However, this illusion of perfection shattered on March 4, 2022, when Corey made a frantic emergency call to report that her husband Eric was not responding. When paramedics arrived, they discovered that Eric had sadly died. Corey was devastated by the news and called her mom, Lisa, who rushed over. Her brothers DJ and Ronnie joined them, struggling to process Eric's sudden death. They'd celebrated Corey's business success at their new mansion earlier, with Corey making Eric a Moscow mule before bed. She'd slept with her son due to his nightmares, and when she returned to their room at 3 a.m., found Eric cold and unresponsive. As Corey waited for the paramedics to arrive, she remembered the dispatcher's instructions to perform CPR on Eric, which she claimed to have followed. While the paramedics were unable to determine the exact cause of Eric's death, they suspected it might have been an aneurysm, given that Eric was a healthy 39-year-old with no known medical conditions. However, it emerged later that Eric had confided in Corey about chest pains the night before his death, which lent further support to the aneurysm theory. But the autopsy results were to reveal a shocking truth. Eric's death was caused by a lethal dose of fentanyl, a powerful and dangerous pain medication that can be fatal in excessive amounts. This discovery raised a critical question for the investigators. How did Eric ingest this substance? Eric's family blamed his recreational drug use for the fentanyl in his system after he died. Corey said Eric took THC gummies nightly to relax, but they worried about their source, suspecting he bought them illegally. Despite this, Eric's family firmly rejected the allegations, convinced that there was more to the story, and urged investigators to explore alternative explanations. Meanwhile, Corey attempted to move forward with her life, but her brother Ronnie disclosed that she was facing immense challenges. The loss of her husband and their father had created a void in their lives, and their 3 sons were acting out in response to the uncertainty surrounding his death. Detectives suspected foul play in Eric's death. After Corey appeared on Utah News to promote her book on grief, she was arrested May 8, 2023, accused of murdering her husband. The community was stunned, trying to make sense of the sudden, tragic turn of events. Corey has been accused of homicide by poisoning. Eric's family claims that Corey deliberately added a lethal dose of fentanyl to the Moscow mule she prepared for him on the night he died. However, Corey's lawyer argues that no fentanyl was found on the glassware at their home. Corey denies any involvement in Eric's death, stating that she had no motive to harm him. Corey's mother, Lisa, was shocked and disbelieving when she heard about her daughter's alleged role in Eric's death. She told investigators that the couple seemed happy and there was no reason for Corey to kill him. However, The investigation revealed that the relationship between Corey and Eric was not as perfect as it seemed. The couple had issues, and Corey, a stay-at-home mom for several years, longed for independence. Furthermore, Corey was growing increasingly frustrated with Eric's frequent hunting trips. Lisa revealed that Eric had been unfaithful in the marriage, and the couple had confided in her about the affair. Eric and Corey sought counseling to address their problems, but Eric's family denies that he ever cheated on Corey. According to them, the couple's decision to seek counseling was driven by Eric's love for his sons and his desire to save the marriage. Eric had started thinking about what would happen if he got a divorce, despite trying to save his marriage. To protect his assets, he took some precautions. Without telling anyone what he was doing, he set up a secret trust with his sister Katie. During the investigation, it was found that there were 6 life insurance policies on Eric, worth a total of $3 million. 2 months before Eric died, Corey had forged his signature on another policy worth $100,000. It was also discovered that Corey had allegedly taken money from Eric's personal accounts and misused funds from his business over several years. A spokesperson for Eric's family claimed that Corey's house flipping business was in trouble, despite her claims that it was doing well. In fact, it was millions of dollars in debt. The spokesperson alleged that Corey urgently needed money, and that, according to a premarital agreement they had signed, she would only inherit Eric's business assets if he died before her, while they were still married. Corey's attorney rejected the allegations, clarifying that her business was not in debt. They pointed out that temporarily taking on debt through lines of credit was a standard practice in the house flipping business, and that once the properties were sold, the debt would be settled. The attorney stressed that the large figure cited by the spokesperson simply represented the volume of business transactions involved. Lisa, Corey's mom, said Eric backed Corey's business ventures, including buying the Heber Valley mansion where they partied the night he died. Corey bought the 2017-built abandoned mansion with investor help, planning to develop it into a recreational spot and sell for a profit, potentially earning $12 million, a huge jump from the $3 million purchase price. Eric's family says he opposed buying a mansion, contradicting reports. They claim he argued with his wife about it, and that Corey gave him a fentanyl-laced drink on the night he died. They also accuse Corey of previously trying to harm Eric on a Greece trip. However, Corey's brother Ronnie denies these claims, saying Eric's illness was due to taking antibiotics and being mistakenly served liquor. Eric's family claims Corey tried to kill him twice, including on Valentine's Day 2022, when he had a severe allergic reaction after eating a sandwich she brought him. They also questioned her behavior after his death, including an incident where she punched his sister in the face and neck while trying to access a safe containing $125,000 to $165,000 in cash. Corey had a 4-hour bail hearing, handcuffed beside her attorney, trying to convince the judge to release her on bail. Prosecutors presented 3 witnesses and evidence, claiming she poisoned her husband. A cell phone expert testified about Corey's Google searches, including how to retrieve deleted iPhone texts and a lethal fentanyl dose. Her attorney countered that these searches happened after her husband's death, as Corey sought answers to her own accusations. Prosecutors questioned the lead detective about Corey's sources for the drugs used to kill Eric. A woman named Carmen Labber, who worked for Corey, told investigators about a meeting where Corey asked her to buy fentanyl for an investor with a back injury. Carmen, with a criminal history, agreed and bought 15 to 30 pills, exchanging them for cash on February 11, 2022, days before Eric's poisoning attempt. During the investigation, Carmen revealed that Corey got in touch with her again, saying he wanted stronger drugs. She said Corey paid for the pills with a check about a week after Eric died. However, Corey's lawyer disputed this, suggesting the check might have been payment for cleaning work instead. The lawyer also tried to raise doubts about Carmen's trustworthiness by pointing out that she was a convicted felon on probation. At the bail hearing, Eric's sister spoke to the judge about the family's intense emotional pain after Eric's death and their fear that if Corey were released on bail, they would suffer even more. The judge decided to keep Corey in custody. In 2023, Corey had a serious medical crisis in jail after taking prescribed medication, which caused her to have a seizure and required hospitalization. While searching her cell, jail officials found a handwritten letter that prosecutors claimed provided additional evidence of Corey's plans and motivations. Prosecutors requested a no-contact order, citing the letter as proof of Corey's attempt to intimidate witnesses. Prosecutors claim Corey wrote her mom, instructing her brother Ronnie on how to testify in court, saying Eric got drugs in Mexico. The letter stated Ronnie should say Eric admitted to buying pain pills in Tijuana and to obtain texts about Eric's drug use. Corey adamantly denied the letter was witness tampering, stating that the letter was nothing but a fictional creation she wrote as a fantasy story. The judge denied the motion for no contact, stating that the state failed to prove witness tampering. Corey's family seeks custody of their 3 sons, currently living with Eric's relative. The boys have regular video calls with Corey in jail, and her family attends their public sports events. Corey faces 25 years to life if convicted of murdering her husband Eric with fentanyl. His family has filed civil cases, believing she's after his money. The trial starts in 2025. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michael Haight. Michael Haight was born on January 7, 1980 in Seattle, Washington, but his family moved to Cedar City, Utah, when he was young, after his father finished dental school. Growing up, Michael was an active boy who enjoyed playing baseball, basketball, and soccer. He achieved the rank of Eagle Scout and performed well academically. After graduating from high school in 1998, Michael worked at a fish plant in Alaska during the summer, where he quickly rose to the position of line manager, overseeing more than a dozen men, due to his strong work ethic and dedication. Michael then served a mission trip to South Brazil as a devoted member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which further deepened his faith and strengthened his bond with his religious community. Upon returning to the United States, Michael pursued a business degree at Southern Utah University, graduating in 2004. During his time at the university, he met his future wife, Tasha Earle, and they fell in love, getting married in the St. George Temple on May 10, 2003. Michael seemed like the perfect family man to those who didn't know him. He was always involved in his kids' lives, coaching their sports teams, attending school concerts, and spending quality time with them, whether it was sledding or working on projects in the garage. But on January 4th, 2023, the illusion he created around his family life shattered. That day, police found 8 dead bodies at the Haight residence, leaving investigators and neighbors stunned and confused. When Tasha Haight missed an online appointment and her husband Michael failed to show up for work, their colleagues became worried and alerted the police to check on the family's welfare at their home in Enoch. The officers arrived at the Haight residence, but no one answered the door. As they walked around the property, it looked like nobody was home. Knowing the family had 5 kids, the police contacted the Iron County School District to see if any of the children were in school that day, but it turned out none of the kids were present when the police arrived at the Haight home. The officers searched the premises to make sure there was no immediate danger, and after a thorough search, confirmed that nobody needed medical attention and there were no signs of an active threat. The detectives arrived at the crime scene shortly after it was declared. Upon entering the main bedroom, they saw 4-year-old Gavin lying on his stomach with his head turned to the left, one arm under his head on a pillow, and a blanket covering part of his body. His sister Tasha was similarly positioned with only part of her body covered by the blanket. On the other side of the bed, they found Gail Earle, Tasha's mother, lying on her back with her head on a pillow and partially covered by a blanket, just like her daughter and grandson. In Bry's room, the detectives found the 12-year-old girl lying in bed, slightly inclined and partially covered with a blanket. In Amon's room, they discovered the 7-year-old boy lying face down in the corner of the room, without a pillow or blanket. His twin sister Sienna was found in her bedroom, lying on her left side in bed with her head resting on a pillow and covered with a blanket. The eldest child, 17-year-old Macy, was found in her bed, her head resting on a pillow and her body covered by the blanket. The detectives discovered Michael Haight's body in the exercise room in the basement of his home, lying on top of a sleeping bag. All 8 victims, including his wife, mother-in-law, and 5 children, were found dead with gunshot wounds. Given the circumstances, it didn't take long for the detectives to identify Michael Haight as the primary suspect. They believed he had killed his family members before taking his own life. A neighbor's testimony played a crucial role in helping the detectives reconstruct the timeline of the crime. The neighbor recalled waking up at 3:30 a.m. to use the bathroom and hearing a loud bang, similar to fireworks, as she exited her room. However, she felt annoyed because it was past the permitted date for fireworks in the neighborhood. She then heard 2 more bangs in quick succession, followed by a short pause. This pattern continued, with brief pauses before each subsequent bang, except for a longer pause before the final one. Based on the neighbor's statement and the condition of the 8 bodies found inside the house, detectives theorized that the loud noises she had heard around 3:30 a.m. were directly connected to the events of that night. They suspected that Michael Hatch committed the brutal murders during this specific time frame. During the investigation into the Hatch family murders, detectives discovered that an unnamed person outside the family had reported abuse to the Utah Division of Child and Family Services in 2020. This individual claimed that 14-year-old Macy confided in them about her fear of her father, sparking a deeper investigation into the Hatch household. After receiving the DCFS report, Macy and her parents were questioned separately. During Macy's interview, the investigator uncovered disturbing information. Macy revealed that her father had choked her on multiple occasions, and she feared he would kill her. She disclosed that the violent attacks began in 2017, including an incident where her father grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her into a wooden piece of furniture. When detectives questioned Michael Hatch, he claimed he had never physically harmed his daughter. He downplayed the incidents Macy described, saying they were simply misunderstandings. Michael attributed his emotional turmoil to 2 recent events: the death of his father and his brother's divorce. He stated that, in his distress, he took out his frustration on his older daughter, Tasha. Tasha chose not to pursue criminal charges against Michael. Similarly, the Utah Department of Children and Family Services, the Enoch Police Department, and the Iron County Prosecutor's Office decided not to press charges, deeming the case insufficient to meet the prosecution requirements set by the statute. A lethality assessment was conducted with Tasha, which revealed that her relationship with Michael did not pose a significant threat to her life. Nevertheless, victim services were made available to Tasha and her children for several months following the case's opening. Through conversations with Tasha's friends, detectives formed a different impression of Michael Hatch than the one he presented to the community. Tasha's friends revealed that whenever they visited, they would often chat with her, while the kitchen water was running to mask their conversation, as Tasha suspected Michael was spying on her discussions. They also helped Tasha with housework during their visits so Michael wouldn't have anything to criticize her about. Tasha's friends disclosed that whenever she texted them, she would respond with brief, upbeat messages, likely aware that Michael might read them. They believed she did this to maintain a positive facade for Michael's benefit, implying that everything was fine in their marriage. Detectives found Michael displayed controlling behavior towards his wife, Tasha. He took away her car keys and phone to keep her from leaving. They also suspected him after he overreacted to her buying a $30 rug from Walmart, accusing her of excessive spending despite the legitimate need. Tasha shared with her friends her concerns that her 7-year-old son, Amon, was increasingly mimicking his father Michael's bad behavior. Whenever she gave Amon an instruction, he would respond by saying that it was not his job. This worried Tasha because it revealed Amon's growing lack of responsibility and disregard for authority. She mentioned that Michael frequently disregarded or ignored her instructions, and Amon seemed to be following his example. In 2022, Tasha prioritized self-care by getting her nails done despite her busy schedule. However, her husband Michael wasn't supportive, imposing strict rules on her independence. After her appointment, Tasha felt confident and told Michael she'd make it a monthly routine, sparking his anger over the potential cost. To address Michael's concerns, Tasha explained calmly that her monthly self-care expenses came out to $25. Despite this, Michael remained skeptical, claiming that by spending money on her nails, Tasha was essentially taking away from their children's basic needs. This stance stemmed from his need for control and sense of financial responsibility towards their family. At the same time, Tasha began to prioritize her self-care and eventually started losing weight, a significant change after years of her husband calling her fat and ugly. Michael became angry about her weight loss, accusing Tasha of cheating on him as he struggled to explain the sudden change in her appearance. As Michael's controlling behavior escalated, he tried to manipulate Tasha regarding her weight loss. He begged her to stop, fearing that other men might find her attractive. Underlying this request were his deep-seated insecurities and desire for complete control over his wife's body and actions. Michael exhibited a frugal attitude during the holiday season, despite earning a significant income. He allocated only $100 for each of their 5 children to buy gifts, whereas Tasha made sure they had a fulfilling Christmas. However, Michael refused to provide additional funds for his wife and children, justifying his stance by claiming that he didn't see the need to give them more of what he believed was rightfully his. Michael controlled every aspect of Tasha's life, including her cleaning and childcare habits. He insisted on using baby wipes, claiming they were eco-friendly and cost-effective, but this caused Tasha stress and compromised her comfort and hygiene. If she didn't comply, Michael threatened trouble, leaving her fearful and submissive. According to Tasha's friends, she revealed to them that Michael was mean to her throughout their marriage, but he didn't mistreat their children until the late 2010s. However, as time passed, the abuse towards Macy worsened, causing her to contemplate suicide. Michael had unrealistically high expectations for Macy, demanding she maintain straight A's despite her struggles. The pressure to meet his expectations became overwhelming for Macy, who was already dealing with the emotional weight of her father's abuse. Macy's friends shared another disturbing incident with the detective. One evening, Michael came home and found Macy resting her head on her mother's lap. He became enraged and ordered Macy to get up and clean her room. This event left Macy deeply shaken, as she remembered gazing into her father's eyes and seeing hatred and evil staring back. Detectives found another instance where 7-year-old Briley disobeyed Michael's warnings. Michael blamed his wife Tasha for their kids' misbehavior, calling them the worst in the world. He berated Tasha in front of their kids, even calling her fat and ugly. Tasha realized she needed to escape her 20-year marriage to Michael after a distressing incident exposed his abusive nature and temper. Seeing the harm it was causing their kids, she knew she had to leave. Tasha decided to divorce Michael after over 20 years, prioritizing their children's well-being over their marriage. On Dec 21, 2022, she initiated proceedings, but asked to delay serving papers until after the holiday season, wanting one last normal Christmas for their 5 kids before the separation. Michael got divorce papers at his office on Dec 27th. He called Tasha, acting normal, asking about her day, like nothing was wrong. He told her to leave the house but wanted the kids to stay. Tasha refused, insisting on taking the kids with her. Tasha took the children to her mother's house in Lynn, Utah. That evening, Michael arrived at his mother-in-law's house and tried to persuade Tasha to go for a ride with him. But Tasha declined, telling her friends she had a bad feeling about going anywhere alone with Michael. After Tasha filed for divorce, her mom Gail moved in to help. However, Michael made things worse by moving into the basement fitness room instead of leaving the house. Tasha told her friends she had found a discrepancy in their children's savings accounts, which held $220,000. What she discovered shocked her. Michael had transferred the money out of the accounts without her knowledge or permission. After her father's death, Tasha inherited several firearms, including hunting rifles and a handgun. When she checked her house in January 2023, she realized all the guns were gone. Further investigation revealed Michael had taken the weapons, leaving Tasha and her family defenseless in case of an emergency. Macy, Michael and Tasha's eldest child, confided in her friends that she would welcome her parents' divorce. She longed for the peace that would come with her father's absence from the home. Macy even kept a secret phone in her room, which she used to record her father's erratic behavior, hoping to gather evidence to support the divorce. However, Tasha found the phone and hid it away. Macy's younger sister, Briley, had a troubled home life due to the constant drama. To escape this, Briley would often visit her neighbor's house, where she found comfort with their grandchildren. Briley confided in a friend that she was relieved about her parents' upcoming divorce. She had even bought some new books, but was too afraid to tell her father, fearing he would become angry. Tasha met her lawyer on January 3, 2023, to discuss her divorce from abusive husband Michael. She felt relieved he'd moved to the basement due to his volatile behavior. Asked if she'd ever feared for her or her children's safety, Tasha said she never had. In hindsight, Tasha's optimism was tragically misplaced. The police investigation was harrowing, piecing together a chilling sequence of events. A disturbing Google search on December 30th stood out, revealing Michael's firearms queries just days before the deadly shooting, painting a chilling picture of his intentions. The search results revealed alarming questions, such as inquiries about how loud a 9mm gunshot is, what a gunshot sounds like, what to do if gunshots are heard near one's house, if a single gunshot in the neighborhood at night would be immediately recognized, and if one would be brave enough to call the police, how loud a gunshot in the house would be, and if a neighbor would hear a gunshot in the garage, and how loud a 40mm pistol is. Michael's suicide note said he'd rather rot in hell than endure his wife's controlling behavior. He felt desperate, frustrated, and trapped, repeatedly asking for help that never came. Determined to end the manipulation, he refused to be a burden to society. The case's details have shocked many, revealing a deeply dysfunctional family plagued by violence. Michael's actions were premeditated, carefully planned to catch his family off guard. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Williams. Michelle was raised in Hurst, a suburb of Dallas, Texas, alongside her younger sister Laura. After their mother left to pursue a better life, their father took on the responsibility of raising them. However, he struggled to provide for the family, often relying on unstable construction work and seeking solace in alcohol. In an attempt to make ends meet, Michelle's father devised and carried out schemes to obtain easy money. He would take jobs at factories, intentionally injure himself, and collect insurance payouts. Although this tactic initially worked, it was eventually exposed with the help of CCTV cameras at one of his workplaces, resulting in his arrest and imprisonment. Growing up in an environment filled with deception and manipulation, Michelle became accustomed to a life of dishonesty. She desperately sought escape from this reality, but the lies and deceit had become ingrained in her way of life, making it difficult for her to imagine an alternative. Michelle longed to grow up quickly and leave her impoverished life behind. By the age of 15, she had developed into an attractive young woman, drawing attention from both her peers and older individuals. Michelle soon discovers that she can use her femininity and charm to influence the men around her and get what she wants. As a result, she enters a series of romantic relationships with various men. At 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien, telling him she's pregnant. Kenneth takes responsibility for his young wife and unborn child, joining the army to provide for them. They move frequently, having 2 more children, but Michelle grows dissatisfied with their nomadic lifestyle and temporary military housing. After 5 years, Michelle leaves Kenneth, citing his infidelity and physical abuse as reasons for the divorce. She returns to her hometown of Hearst, portraying herself as a victim of domestic violence to garner support from relatives and friends. As Michelle rebuilds her life, she reconnects with an old classmate, Brandon, and falls in love. Brandon is smitten with Michelle and happily accepts her 3 children from her previous marriage. They were preparing to get married, but just before the wedding, Brandon became furious with Michelle. He discovered that she had not finalized her divorce from her first husband. Michelle had been afraid to discuss the divorce with her ex-husband due to his abusive behavior, and as a result, she hadn't sent the necessary documents. With the help of a lawyer, they quickly resolved the issue, and they was able to get married in 1994. Initially, their family life was peaceful and routine. Brandon focused on growing his IT company, while Michelle worked as a dental assistant. However, Michelle had bigger aspirations. She began bringing home various dental equipment and supplies. Brandon's concerns grew as he suspected something was wrong. It was later revealed that Michelle had been stealing. Fortunately, they avoided going to trial. However, this incident marked the beginning of Brandon's trust issues with his wife. When neighbors reported that cars frequently visited their house while Brandon was at work, he installed a tape recorder in several rooms. Upon listening to the recordings, he discovered that various men were visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon conducted his own investigation and discovered that Michelle's first marriage ended in divorce due to her repeated infidelities, contradicting her claim that it was her husband's abuse. Upon learning this, Brandon reached his limit and requested a divorce. Enraged that Brandon was the one to initiate the split, Michelle sought revenge while he was away at work. Brandon had a valuable saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish. Michelle destroyed it by pouring Comet into the tank, killing all the fish. But that was not the end of her destructive behavior. Brandon's dog, Domino, was also a victim of Michelle's cruelty. She gave the dog sleeping pills, which led to its death. However, this was only the beginning of Brandon's nightmare. Michelle's actions continued to cause harm, and Brandon eventually learned the truth about her when his marriage was ruined. What Michelle did to Brandon was not an isolated incident. Her treatment of other men was even more shocking. It was later discovered that Michelle's first child was the child of her and John Paul Ray, a high school classmate of hers. Instead of telling John the truth, Michelle convinces Kenneth O'Brien that the child is his and he is forced to marry her. For 13 years, Kenneth believed the child was his child and even paid child support from age 5 to 18. After Michelle's divorce from Brandon, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived together in a common-law marriage for 8 years. However, their relationship ended abruptly when John suspected Michelle of cheating on him. Michelle confirmed she was having an affair, which led to John moving out and leaving most of her belongings behind. She then met Greg Williams, a man with a history of marital failures, having been married twice before and having a daughter named Taylor from his previous marriage to Katie. After Greg and Katie's divorce in 2003, they shared custody of Taylor and maintained a good relationship, which made a formal child support agreement unnecessary. Greg was a successful and generous man who seemed like a perfect partner for Michelle. In 2007, Greg and Michelle had a daughter named Michaela, and they got married a year later. Their marriage seemed like the epitome of the American dream, with plenty of money, children, and love. Michelle appeared to have finally achieved the life she had always wanted. Greg came from a family with strong principles and had achieved success through his own hard work from a young age. He was a sports enthusiast and a black belt in martial arts. Both Greg and Michelle owned guns, which they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle kept a silver .40 caliber pistol in a safe, while Greg stored his black LAA .45 caliber gun, always loaded, in a case under his bedside table. Despite their differences, they was committed to making their marriage work. They regularly hosted birthday parties for their children from previous relationships at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children frequently hosted barbecues and pool parties at their home, which was always filled with friends. Despite their idyllic suburban life and bright daughter, Michelle and her husband Greg didn't fit the traditional American couple mold. They had met through an online forum for those interested in bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their raucous adult gatherings had drawn numerous complaints from their neighbors. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call was made by a frantic woman, claiming she and her husband had been attacked by an intruder. She reported being injured and her husband shot. Police quickly arrived at the scene, discovered a blaring television and a baby sleeping on the couch inside the house. Michelle's daughter was fast asleep and unharmed during the incident. However, Michelle's behavior raised suspicions among the police officers who arrived at the scene. Despite claiming to have just experienced a burglary and assault, Michelle appeared remarkably calm and composed. Her hair was styled, and she was fully dressed, which seemed inconsistent with her story. The police soon cordoned off the entire gated community and thoroughly searched the home. As the investigation progressed, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for further questioning. Over several hours of interrogation, her account of the events began to unravel. Michelle initially claimed that an intruder, dressed in black, had struck her on the head with a wrench. She alleged that she fell to the ground but remained conscious and heard a gunshot. According to her, the intruder then fled through the back door. However, the evidence at the scene contradicted her story. Greg Williams, the victim, was found shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun and a wrench were discovered near the back door, but the circumstances suggested that Michelle's account was not entirely credible. The investigation found no fingerprints on the weapons and no signs of forced entry. The family's valuables, including a large sum of cash, were left untouched. Security footage revealed that the only car to enter the gated community before the crime belonged to a newspaper delivery person. Michelle attempted to mislead the police by fabricating a story about the attack. She even went so far as to injure herself with a wrench and stage the scene. However, detectives noticed inconsistencies in her account. The discovery of the gun used in the crime, devoid of fingerprints, further raised suspicions. The final discrepancy was the untouched $20,000 in cash, which Michelle couldn't explain. While Michelle was unable to provide a reason for why her husband, a successful businessman and devoted father, would take his own life, she was able to justify her own actions. Michelle claimed she wanted to protect their young daughter from the painful truth about her father's death. She told the police that she had cleaned the gun and washed her husband Greg's hands to remove fingerprints, and then staged a fake home invasion before calling for help. This explanation seemed strange, but it explained why no evidence of an intruder was found. Michelle also admitted to using bleach to clean up the crime scene and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to make the attack look more believable. From the start, the police in Keller suspected that Michelle's story was not true, but at the time, they did not have any physical evidence that linked her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for lying to the police, but she was later released. Around 5 p.m. on the day of her husband's murder, Michelle visited her sister Laura's home. During the evening, Michelle cried occasionally, but her sister felt that Michelle's tears seemed insincere. Notably, Michelle didn't mention her late husband's name once. The next morning, when questioned by police, Michelle appeared to be in a great mood. She was well-dressed, had styled her hair, and was wearing makeup. Despite the ongoing investigation into her husband's death, Michelle went out for breakfast at a popular restaurant. As investigators struggled to find a motive and credible evidence, Michelle inadvertently provided them with both. During her initial interrogation, Michelle claimed she wasn't interested in money. However, her actions after Greg's death told a different story. She quickly began selling off assets from their family businesses and spending large sums of money. Michelle had been cashing checks through her husband Greg's IT company, but the exact amount is unknown. It is likely that the amount was substantial. After selling the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made a crucial mistake. She attempted to claim the payout on Greg's life insurance policy, for which she was the sole beneficiary. The policy was taken out on August 12, 2011, nearly 2 months before Greg's death. However, Michelle overlooked a key detail: the policy did not cover Greg's death since he had taken his own life. As a result, the insurance company denied her the $60,000 payout, which was the primary motive for the crime. Later, another financial irregularity came to light that raised suspicions about Michelle. It was discovered that she had used falsified financial documents to secure a mortgage loan for the house that she and Greg were planning to buy before his death. The account numbers had been intentionally altered, and the lender did not immediately detect the elaborate scheme. Following Greg's death, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account went undiscussed until it caught the attention of the police. Despite the scrutiny, Michelle felt confident in her ability to avoid consequences and wrote a check for $188,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn. She then took a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During a 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police uncovered a web of deceit spun by his wife, Michelle. An autopsy revealed that Greg was shot from a distance of 12 to 18 inches. A toxicology report also showed that Greg had a large amount of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Further investigation found no evidence of a break-in or assault on the house. Instead, police determined that Michelle had sedated her husband, turned up the TV volume, and shot him from close range. Their daughter was asleep in her room and did not hear the shooting. On November 3, 2011, the Tarrant County Medical Examiner officially ruled Greg's death a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9 while on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and providing a false statement to police. As the sole witness and suspect, Michelle's bail was set at $522,000. However, she spent only a week in custody before being released on a reduced bail of $85,000. Michelle walked out of jail wearing gym clothes and a GPS monitor, accompanied by her new attorney, Kenneth Wincorn. However, this news infuriated Kathy, Greg's first wife, as she had paid Wincorn with money from Greg's estate, which she believed should not be used to defend Michelle, who was accused of killing Greg. According to online court records, Kenneth Wincorn's law firm had handled Greg and his ex-wife Kathy's divorce in 2003, and his name appeared on documents related to the custody agreement for their daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Wincorn later provided evidence showing his company, rather than him personally, had handled Greg's divorce case, which cleared him of the accusations that he had colluded with Michelle. Kenneth Wincorn learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. He described the news as shocking. Later, Michelle sought his help after her attempt to profit from Greg's death failed. Michelle changed her name to Shelley and presented herself as a fitness guru on Facebook. She publicly revealed her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son who is nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and actively promoted it online. Michelle spent the next few months attending court hearings, enjoying her new relationship, and participating in fitness classes while wearing a GPS tracking ankle bracelet. Her courtroom attire often included miniskirts, knee-length boots, and revealing blouses. According to Greg's ex-wife Kathy, Michelle never showed any signs of mourning Greg's death. Rob Conover, a friend of Greg's for over 20 years, attended many of Michelle's hearings. He observed how Michelle skillfully manipulated police officers, portraying herself as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle took a plea deal, pleading guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. Michelle Williams has been sentenced to 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and engaging in deadly, dangerous conduct. This is a third-degree felony that is only recognized in a few states. Initially, Michelle admitted to cleaning the gun and her husband Greg's body, but the lack of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about the first-degree murder charge. The trial of Michelle Williams, also known as Keller's Black Widow, has begun. Prosecutors allege that she intentionally targeted her husband in 2011 to collect on his substantial life insurance policy. They described the crime as a clearly planned scheme motivated by greed. According to prosecutors, Michelle drugged her husband with sleeping pills and then shot him in the head to collect the insurance payout. Michelle admitted to cleaning the gun and Greg's body, but the lack of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about the first-degree murder charge. In a statement, Michelle's attorney, Kenneth Wincorn, highlighted the challenges in the case due to the thoroughly cleaned crime scene. If the jury finds that Michelle tampered with evidence and cleaned up the crime scene, she could receive a life sentence. During the trial, prosecutors stated that in the hours preceding the violent death, Greg Williams had a heated argument with his wife over financial issues. The altercation escalated to the point where he slapped her for spending a significant amount of money intended for a house down payment. In contrast, Michelle Williams' defense team claimed that Greg Williams took his own life. Defense attorney Clay Graham added that Greg Williams frequently struggled with depression and was known to use sedatives and steroids regularly. Michelle Williams' husband, Greg, was found dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Michelle stated that she attempted to cover up the incident to shield her 4-year-old daughter from the truth. Throughout the court hearings, Michelle maintained a composed appearance but showed some emotional response when presented with photographs of her deceased husband. Michelle planned to blame Greg's ex-wife for the crime, claiming it was due to custody disputes. However, this plan was flawed as there were no actual disputes. Michelle's adult son testified against her, revealing she had asked him to assist in framing Greg's ex-wife. After many hours of deliberation, the jury found Michelle guilty of tampering with physical evidence, a felony offense. She received a harsh sentence, 60 years in prison, with the stipulation that she must serve at least 30 years before becoming eligible for parole. Michelle has not expressed remorse for her actions and continues to evade full responsibility for her crimes. She is currently serving her time at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Abril Perez. Abril Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, northeastern Mexico, to parents Maria del Seguro Sagan and Manuel Perez. She was the second of 3 children. Abril demonstrated exceptional mathematical and entrepreneurial abilities from a young age. She was a dedicated reader and consistently ranked as the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abril prioritized achieving financial independence, showcasing remarkable discipline and effective time management skills. Following high school, Abril attended the most prestigious university in New Leon, where she obtained a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her peers described her as intelligent, focused, and ambitious, while also being kind, cheerful, and always willing to assist others. After graduating, Abril secured a position in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. She later transitioned into digital sales, a rapidly expanding field, and discovered her true passion. Abril quickly rose through the ranks and became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abril was a young, beautiful, and successful woman who was rapidly achieving her life goals. She had built a stellar career, supported her family, and had big plans for the future. However, her personal life was still unfulfilled, which worried her loved ones. Despite this, Abril was confident that she would find true love and live a long, happy life. But she had no idea how her future marriage to the seemingly perfect man would turn out. That man was Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, whom she met in the mid-1990s when her career was taking off. Juan Carlos was just 3 years older than Abril and shared her ambitious drive, which drew her to him. He, in turn, was captivated by her stunning looks, charming personality, kind heart, bright smile, sharp intellect, and remarkable determination. Juan Carlos graduated from a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in economics and trade. He then continued his studies at Harvard University in the United States. After returning to Mexico, he built a successful career in the emerging field of e-commerce. Juan Carlos and Abril met at a conference on the latest financial technologies. Their companies collaborated on several projects, allowing them to cross paths multiple times. Eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had developed feelings for Abril, who was intelligent and beautiful. He obtained her phone number through mutual acquaintances and asked her out on a date. Abril was also attracted to Juan Carlos, finding him to be educated, elegant, and engaging in conversation on a wide range of topics. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and by 1998, they decided to get married. At that point, they had both achieved significant success in their careers and were working on developing online stores, a field with great potential. Their life seemed like a fairy tale, inspiring envy and admiration from those around them. However, surface of their perfect family, there were some dark secrets. It wasn't until 2001, 3 years after their wedding, that they had their first child, a daughter named Ana Cecilia. The arrival of their child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband appeared happy, showing their newborn daughter love and admiration. 2 years later, Abril gave birth to a son, named Juan Carlos Jr., after his father. 2 more years passed, and the family had another child, a boy named Julio Andres. Despite having 3 young children, Abril hardly took any time off work and managed to balance parenting with career advancement. She made homemade meals, helped with schoolwork, took the children to sports activities, and aimed to be both a perfect mother and their best friend. Outwardly, the Perez-Sanchez family seemed perfect, wealthy, successful, with 3 lovely children, and everything they could want. However, their home life remained a secret, even from their closest relatives, for a long time. In the early years of their relationship, Juan Carlos revealed his true personality to Abril. He had a short temper, was aggressive, and had a tendency to be overly harsh, refusing to compromise and insisting that everything be done his way. Initially, Abril was in love and believed that as time passed, Juan Carlos's rough edges would smooth out. Their shared projects brought them together, and their collaboration led to significant accomplishments, including financial success. However, as the years went by, Juan Carlos's irritability grew, and verbal arguments escalated into physical confrontations. Following the birth of their first daughter, he made a brief effort to control his emotions, but this change was short-lived. A similar attempt was made after the birth of their eldest son, but by the time their third child arrived, Juan Carlos no longer made any effort to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos frequently directed his anger and frustration at Abril and disregarding her emotional well-being. He would insult and belittle her, the mother of his children, and seemed to feel better when she cried. He regularly physically harmed her, doing so in a way that left no visible marks, allowing her to hide the bruises with clothing or makeup. His goal was to maintain his reputation as a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abril kept quiet about the abuse for years, not even telling her sister and mother about the ongoing situation. She earned a good income and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and stable upbringing. However, her husband was wealthy and influential, and she knew he could use the courts to take the children away from her. Knowing Juan Carlos's true nature, Abril couldn't bear the thought of her children being left alone with him, as she considered him a monster capable of anything. When the family's situation reached a boiling point, what was once considered an ideal household now raised suspicions that something was terribly wrong. Abril was not just subdued, but deeply distressed and visibly struggling. She had lost weight, slept poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that were becoming harder to hide and explain. Despite this, Juan Carlos appeared calm and confident in public, pretending that everything was fine. He played the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with Abril politely and affectionately. However, at home, he transformed into a menacing figure. Despite loved ones urging Abril to divorce him, she insisted that everything was fine and that she could handle the problems with her husband on her own. 2014 marked the peak of Juan Carlos' career when he became the head of a major trading company, making him one of the most influential people in his field. Following this promotion, his family relocated to Mexico City, settling into a large house in one of the capital's upscale neighborhoods. Their children began attending an elite private school. Abril had genuinely hoped that this change of environment would improve their relationship. However, contrary to her expectations, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos often persisted in physically and verbally abusing his wife in front of their children. He increasingly accused her of infidelity without any basis for his claims. Whenever she tried to defend herself, he would resort to physical violence, insisting he would find evidence of her supposed disloyalty. Juan Carlos monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and when finding no evidence, he hired a private detective to follow her and photograph any men who came near her. For 4 years, she tried every possible way to save her marriage. Despite her efforts, her husband's behavior became increasingly unbearable, creating a never-ending nightmare for her. To outsiders, however, their union appeared happy and successful, even enviable, due to her husband's wealth, influence, and seemingly caring nature. In 2018, the Juan Carlos and Abril visited to the Abril's family. During this trip, Juan Carlos treated his wife poorly in front of her parents, who were deeply disturbed by what they saw. This incident marked a turning point for Abril, and she realized that she could no longer continue living this way. She informed her husband that she would file for divorce as soon as they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, Juan Carlos became enraged, grabbed her throat, and squeezed it so tightly that she nearly lost consciousness. Fortunately, her mother, Maria del Soro, entered the room and raised the alarm, preventing a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abril prepared for divorce and moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room. However, this did not keep her safe from her husband's abuse. On January 4th, while Abril was still asleep, her husband entered the room holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Abril barely understood what was happening, but she managed to roll off the bed just in time, saving her own life. She began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat away from his father. Together, they fled the house and headed to the hospital, as Abril needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed Abril with a severe concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow that required stitches. After Abril and their sons left the house, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to discuss the situation and asked for help in resolving the marital conflict. However, Juan Carlos also posted on social media, accusing his wife of betraying him by being unfaithful and planning to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to claim all their jointly acquired assets. Additionally, Juan Carlos claimed that Abril had stolen all the money from their home safe and had injured him with a knife when he tried to stop her. He posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor as evidence. However, the blood on the floor actually belonged to Abril from her own injury, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Despite the fabrication, Juan Carlos's friends believed his story and actively shared and reposted his account on their social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this supposedly egregious case. Juan Carlos's attempt to kill Abril prompted her to take swift action. From her hospital bed, she filed a police report against him, accusing him of trying to take her life. After her release from the hospital, Abril packed up her 2 young sons and left the family home. Her oldest child, who was attending college in a nearby city, also condemned his father's violent actions. While waiting for justice, she started providing online support and consultations to women who were going through similar experiences. She also planned to open a center that would offer psychological and legal help to victims of domestic violence who had been failed by the justice system. It wasn't until 8.5 months after the incident, in September 2019, that Juan Carlos was finally arrested and charged with inflicting bodily harm and attempting to kill his wife. He was put in jail, where he spent over a month, but he managed to appeal the decision to keep him in detention before his trial. As a result, he was released from jail by November of that year. Judge Federo presided over the case, reclassifying it and ordering a new trial. During the trial, Abril's medical records and photos were not presented as evidence. Her and her son's testimonies were deemed insufficient to detain Juan Carlos because he claimed Abril was manipulating their children against him. The judge released Juan Carlos, concluding his actions didn't pose a direct threat to Abril's life. Abril was shocked and terrified when Juan Carlos was released. She suspected he had bribed his way to freedom, putting her and their children in danger. She wrote to the judge, expressing her fear, but it had no immediate effect. Juan Carlos then initiated a custody battle, forcing Abril to return to Mexico City with their sons to attend court hearings. Abril arrived in Mexico City on November 25 with her children. She had a legitimate fear of her longtime partner and wanted to avoid him. To minimize the risk of an encounter, she planned to leave the city immediately after a court hearing that day. In fact, she had already bought the plane ticket, but Juan Carlos already knew that. After the court session, Abril, her sons, and their lawyer got into a car headed to the airport. However, they never made it to their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist suddenly pulled up next to their car, drew a handgun, and fired 2 shots at Abril, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. The attacker then quickly fled the scene. A shooting occurred, and one of the bullets grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat. Fortunately, none of the children were seriously injured. However, the injured Abril was rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors fought to save her life for more than 6 hours. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save her. Abril passed away that evening. The victim's family, including her parents, brother, and sister, immediately flew to the capital and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, whom they believed was behind the brutal act. However, law enforcement had a different perspective, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to determine the motive behind the attack. They also noted that they could not confirm with certainty that the shooting was ordered by Juan Carlos. The tragic case of murder sparked widespread outrage and public debate. Abril's family successfully drew attention to the case, highlighting numerous instances where men had attempted to kill women but escaped punishment. In response to the public outcry, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office launched a new investigation into the suspect, Juan Carlos Sanchez, and also examined the actions of the judges who had previously released him. The judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for their role in the Abril death if his guilt was proven. Juan Carlos took to social media to demand justice for his former wife's murder. However, his daughter, Ana Cecilia, accused him of cruelty and shared photos of her mother's hospitalization after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat, contradicting her father's claims that he would never harm her mother. Despite the media attention surrounding the case, he was initially allowed to remain free during the investigation. However, he was required to check in with the police weekly and was placed under a restraining order. When he failed to appear at the scheduled time, a warrant was issued for his arrest for violating the order. As expected, Juan Carlos could not be found, and it was later discovered that he had used his wealth and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting Juan Carlos as a fugitive accused of a serious crime, and he was subsequently declared wanted worldwide. Meanwhile, efforts were underway to locate criminals in Abril's assassination. Surveillance footage from street cameras revealed that the motorcyclist who committed the crime was not alone. Two vehicles were seen following the car carrying Abril. The motorcyclist appeared to be in constant communication with the occupants of these vehicles, receiving directions and instructions. After several months of investigation, some of the participants were identified, and on March 5, 2020, two suspects were arrested in connection with the case. To everyone's surprise, the suspects did not resist arrest and quickly began cooperating with authorities, hoping to receive lighter sentences. It was confirmed that Juan Carlos was the mastermind behind the crime, and he had paid a significant amount of money to individuals who were directly involved in the crime. The first to be caught were the driver of one of the getaway cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It was discovered that while Juan Carlos was in prison, he had hired two experienced criminals to act as his personal bodyguards. One of these bodyguards was released from prison a week before Juan Carlos, and the other was released several days after him. After being released from prison, Juan Carlos reconnected with his accomplices and asked them to recruit trustworthy individuals to help carry out the murder of a person in exchange for a large sum of money. Once all participants were in place, Juan Carlos provided detailed instructions about the intended victim's travel schedule and mode of transportation. However, luring his former wife to Mexico City proved to be a challenge. Juan Carlos used coercion, threatening to take their children unless she attended a court appearance. Despite attending the court date, his ex-wife intended to return to Monterrey on the same day, which Juan Carlos knew about through his sources. 3 more individuals involved in the conspiracy were arrested in late October 2020. Initially, they were taken into custody on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, but further investigation at the police station revealed their potential connection to the high-profile crime. The arrested individuals were part of a major drug trafficking gang led by Balto, who had previously served time with Juan Carlos and offered him protection. In exchange for a significant reward, Balto agreed to help Juan Carlos eliminate his ex-wife. A few weeks later, in November 2020, Maldonado, an individual involved in the case, was also arrested. During his testimony, he confirmed that Juan Carlos had sought out reliable individuals to kill his ex-wife and that he had agreed to assist in exchange for a substantial reward. The investigation confirmed that Juan Carlos was the mastermind behind the crime. His earlier attack on Abril with a stick was reclassified as an attempted murder. As a result, the court issued an arrest warrant for Juan Carlos on charges of femicide. However, his location remained unknown. By spring 2021, The remaining suspects involved in the murder of Abril were apprehended. One of them was already serving time for a separate crime. The searches also led to the discovery of the gun used to kill Abril. In total, 9 individuals linked to the same criminal organization were detained, with 7 of them directly involved in the pursuit and shooting of Abril. More than 4 years after the Abril murder, the mastermind behind the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, is still on the run and his location is unknown. Meanwhile, the man who fired the fatal shot has been convicted and sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 accomplices who participated in the car chase and coordinated with the shooter have each been sentenced to 50 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978 in Columbia, South Carolina. She spent her childhood in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. As a cheerful and outgoing person, Danielle had to mature quickly when she became pregnant at 16. Despite her youth, she was confident in her ability to be a good mother. However, her relationship with Carl, the father of her child, didn't last, and they eventually broke up. In 1996, at the age of 17, Danielle gave birth to her son Tristan, becoming a single mother. Determined to provide the best life for herself and Tristan, Danielle met Luis, who became a father figure to her son. The two had known each other since their teenage years, initially as friends, but eventually became a couple. Danielle was overjoyed to have found happiness again, and Luis took care of both her and Tristan. They moved in together, and Danielle landed an office job at a landscaping company, which she was proud of. In December 1998, Luis popped the question, and Danielle was over the moon when she said yes. At this point, her life was going great. She had a fantastic son, a loving partner, and a career that was really taking off. But in a cruel twist of fate, everything took a devastating turn for the worse on March 15, 1999. Luis returned home from work to find Danielle unresponsive on the bed. Their son Tristan was at daycare that day. The color of Danielle's skin indicated to Luis that she had passed away, so he immediately called 911. The police arrived at the Ashley Lakes apartment complex in Norcross, Georgia, where the couple resided. Initially, the only information the authorities had was that a deceased woman was in the apartment and her fiancé had called the emergency services. This naturally raised the suspicions of the investigators, as it is not uncommon for a partner to be responsible for the death of their loved one. Luis was waiting for the police at the apartment entrance and informed them that the victim was 20-year-old Danielle Jennings. He told the police that when he returned home from work, he found Danielle lying face down on the bed, and upon turning her over, he realized she was dead and promptly called 911. The police took Luis in for questioning at the station, while the crime scene investigators carefully processed the area. Danielle was found lying on her back on the bed, fully clothed, with a ligature tightly wrapped around her neck. The ligature, which appeared to be a stocking, suggested that the perpetrator attacked her from behind. The bed was disheveled, and one of the dresser drawers was open, possibly indicating that the stocking was taken from it. The contents of Danielle's purse had been emptied and searched through, raising the possibility that the perpetrator's primary motive was theft. However, the fact that valuable items like cameras and jewelry were left untouched led the police to consider that the crime might have been committed to eliminate Danielle as a witness to a robbery. Alternatively, the crime scene could have been staged to mislead investigators, as there were no signs of forced entry on the front door or the sliding glass door to the backyard, which was locked. This lack of forced entry led investigators to suspect that Danielle might have let the perpetrator into her apartment or that they had access to keys. As a result, Luis became the prime suspect. During the questioning, Luis became very emotional. The investigators pointed out that romantic relationships can sometimes have tragic outcomes. They started by asking Luis about his movements on the day Danielle died. Luis said he was at work all day. He last saw Danielle when he left for work that morning. They both left their apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle went back inside to grab something. Luis stated that Danielle was anxious about an important meeting with management that day and was worried about it, seeming a little distracted. Luis stated that Danielle phoned him around 11:30 a.m. to invite him to lunch, but he declined due to his heavy workload that prevented him from leaving his job. Later that day, Luis attempted to reach Danielle, but she was unresponsive. He then contacted her coworkers and discovered that she had gone out for lunch but failed to return. As Danielle also wasn't answering their home phone, Luis grew concerned and left work to check on her. Upon arriving at the Ashley Lakes apartments, he noticed that the front door was unlocked and slightly open, which filled him with apprehension. The police asked Luis about his relationship with Danielle, including whether they frequently argued or had family issues. Luis reported that they got along well and were deeply in love. He became distraught, arguing that the police were wasting their time by questioning him and should instead focus on finding the actual perpetrator, who was still at large. The detectives also spoke with Danielle's friends and family, all of whom were convinced that Luis was incapable of harming her. The couple had been planning their wedding and were still very much in love. Luis's coworkers confirmed that he had been at work all day, which verified his alibi and led to his removal from the list of suspects. During the interrogation, Luis stated that Danielle's coworker, Jeff, a middle-aged manager, had been paying her excessive attention, which made her uncomfortable. This was corroborated by her boss when investigators visited her workplace. According to her boss, Danielle had previously complained about Jeff's behavior, alleging that he constantly hovered around her, disrupted her work, and acted inappropriately. Despite their significant age difference, Jeff was 40 and Danielle was 20. Jeff invited Danielle to lunch, but she declined, citing her engagement to a man she loved. Jeff, however, refused to accept her rejection, suggesting that things would be different if he were 20 years younger. The company Danielle worked for took her complaints very seriously. On the day of her death, she had a meeting scheduled to discuss the complaint she had filed against Jeff, a manager at the company. Danielle was extremely anxious about this meeting, as she worried it could jeopardize her career, being a relatively new employee. Her coworkers stated that Danielle left for lunch after the meeting, but never came back, which provided investigators with a time frame for when the attack on Danielle likely occurred. The investigators' suspicions about Jeff grew when they discovered he was away from the office at the time of the crime. Furthermore, he didn't return to the office until evening. Was this merely a coincidence, or could Jeff have killed Danielle in revenge for her complaint? The investigators needed to find answers to these questions and began to focus on Jeff as a prime suspect. They explored the possibility that Jeff tailed Danielle home and attacked her when she opened the front door, which would explain the absence of forced entry. Jeff was summoned for questioning and asked to detail his relationship with Danielle. He acknowledged asking Danielle to lunch, but vigorously denied any role in her death. Although Jeff freely admitted having a liking for Danielle, he insisted he had never behaved improperly towards her and was taken aback when she lodged a complaint against him. When investigators suggested that Danielle's complaint might have motivated him to harm her, Jeff initially responded with indignation. He categorically denied being responsible for her death. Jeff claimed to have a solid alibi, stating that he spent the entire day with a colleague, driving around the city to resolve work-related issues. He provided the colleague's name, who corroborated his alibi, effectively ruling him out as a suspect. The next day, investigators reviewed the autopsy report, searching for clues to identify the killer. The report revealed that Danielle's cause of death was asphyxiation, suggesting she was caught off guard. The evidence indicated that someone had approached her from behind, pulled a stocking tight around her neck until she became unconscious, and then tied a knot to ensure she wouldn't regain consciousness. There were no signs of struggle or injury on her body, except for the ligature mark on her neck. It's possible Danielle never saw her attacker's face. Unfortunately, the crime scene yielded no useful evidence, including shoe prints, DNA, fingerprints, or hair, leaving the police with nothing to send to the laboratory for analysis. Since the police couldn't find any new leads, they went back to the original theory that the murder was a robbery gone wrong. They asked Luis to conduct a thorough search of the apartment with them once again. Luis carefully examined every room and insisted that nothing seemed to be out of place or missing. Everything was exactly where it should be. However, a few days later, Luis reached out to the police with a disturbing discovery. Danielle's wedding ring was nowhere to be found. Moreover, he pointed out another suspicious detail. The stocking used to strangle Danielle didn't belong to her. As Luis explained, Danielle never wore stockings, implying that the killer must have brought it with them. Without evidence, investigators turned their attention to Danielle's past, suspecting a connection between her previous relationships and what happened to her. They questioned her friends about her relationship with Carl, Tristan's father. Her best friend informed the police about Eddie, an ex-boyfriend from when Danielle was already pregnant. Eddie's behavior became increasingly violent and controlling as their relationship progressed, eventually forbidding her from seeing friends and family. After giving birth to Tristan, their relationship further deteriorated, with Eddie starting to use illegal substances. This led Danielle to end the relationship, moving out to start anew. However, Eddie refused to accept rejection, behaving erratically. Consequently, Danielle sought a restraining order, which Eddie repeatedly violated by calling her, parking near her home, and even showing up at her workplace. Danielle's family informed investigators that Eddie had been calling her multiple times in the recent months, insisting on meeting her, but she would always hang up on him. To the detectives, Eddie seemed like the perfect suspect, so they located him and brought him in for questioning. Eddie was hostile and resistant to going to the police station. When he spoke about Danielle, it was clear that it enraged him. When questioned about his relationship with Danielle, his account contradicted what her family members had said. He asserted that he had never been violent towards her and denied any involvement in her death, claiming he hadn't spoken to her in over a year. However, the investigators knew he was lying because they checked Danielle's call history, which revealed that Eddie had indeed been calling her in the months preceding her death. To determine Eddie's whereabouts during the attack on Danielle, the police investigated his alibi. Eddie claimed to have been working far away from the Ashley Lakes apartments at the time, driving out of state as a tow truck driver. His boss corroborated Eddie's story, providing motel and gas receipts that proved he was out of state on the day Danielle died. This new evidence led to yet another dead end for the investigators. Similarly, Carl, Tristan's father, was also cleared from the list of suspects. 3 days after Danielle's death, a crucial lead emerged that altered the investigation's course. While interviewing Ashley Lakes apartment's residents, the police spoke with a woman who shared a strange encounter that had taken place a week prior to Danielle's death. According to her, she was awakened one morning by a knock on the door. After getting out of bed to look through the peephole, she saw no one. She returned to bed, but about a minute later, she heard the front door slam shut. Feeling scared, she got out of bed again, only to find a maintenance man standing in her living room. He claimed to be there to fix something in her apartment. However, the woman felt uneasy because he seemed more interested in looking at her than doing his job. Although she didn't know his name, she provided the police with a detailed description of him. Management at Ashley Lakes Apartments informed investigators about a separate incident involving another woman. This woman reported that a man she didn't know had entered her apartment, claiming he was there to perform maintenance and replace light bulbs. When she told him she didn't have any light bulbs that needed changing, he became flustered and said, "Maybe I have the wrong apartment," before leaving. At Ashley Lake's apartments, there were 2 maintenance specialists on staff, but only one of them matched the description provided by the 2 women, 42-year-old Calvin Oliver. When the investigator showed the women Oliver's photo, they both positively identified him. Notably, Oliver had only begun working at the complex in September 1998. Prior to Danielle's death, a total of 10 residents reported that items including cash, checks, jewelry, and computers had gone missing from their apartments. What's more, there was no evidence of forced entry on the front doors of these apartments. In fact, one of the residents even suspected that the perpetrator was a member of the staff. Calvin Oliver was a prime suspect in the apartment robbery cases due to his living in the same residential complex, allowing him to move around freely without raising any suspicions. Moreover, Oliver possessed a master key, granting him unrestricted access to all apartments. The investigators decided to probe into Oliver's potential connection to Danielle Jennings. It emerged that Oliver had performed some work in Danielle's apartment a couple of weeks prior to her death, making him a person of interest. Given his access to the apartment and knowledge of Danielle and her fiancé Luis's work schedules, it was possible that Oliver had entered their apartment undetected. Perhaps Danielle had returned home for lunch, only to find Oliver already inside her apartment. Investigators brought Calvin Oliver in for questioning, initially asking about the thefts that had prompted complaints from some residents of Ashley Lake's apartments. Oliver denied any involvement in these incidents. When questioned about Danielle Jennings, he claimed to be aware of what had happened to her, but insisted he didn't know her personally. The only admission he made was that he had done some work in her apartment. At that point, the police didn't have any concrete evidence linking Oliver to the crime. Before releasing him, they decided to run a check on Oliver in their database. The results were shocking. Oliver was found to have an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear in court on a burglary charge. This charge was related to the theft of personal checks. Furthermore, Oliver had a long history of criminal activity, dating back to 1974. According to records from the Georgia Department of Correction, by the age of 18, Oliver had already been convicted of several serious crimes, including multiple residential burglaries, armed robbery, robbery using force, larceny, and forcing a woman into intimate contact at knife point. As a result, he spent most of his life behind bars. Oliver had a motive to harm Danielle if she caught him in her apartment, as he didn't want to go back to prison with an active warrant out for his arrest. After the police took him in, they had more time to investigate his possible role in her death. While looking into the thefts at Ashley Lake's apartments, the police got a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. Inside, they found stolen items belonging to other residents and, crucially, Danielle's wedding ring, which connected Oliver to her murder. 9 days following Danielle Jennings' death, Calvin Oliver was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and burglary. During the interrogation, investigators asked Oliver about the stolen wedding ring. He claimed that he had taken it about 3 weeks prior to her death. However, several witnesses contradicted his statement, reporting that they had seen the ring on Danielle's finger the day before her body was discovered. After being caught in this inconsistency, Oliver refused to cooperate and provide further information. At the trial, the prosecutor claimed that Oliver murdered Danielle when she came home unexpectedly and caught him in the act of stealing. Following a 5-day trial that concluded on October 13, 2000, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts against Oliver. The court subsequently sentenced him to life imprisonment for Danielle Jennings' murder, plus an additional 20 years for the theft of her wedding ring. Danielle's mother and stepfather, Sherry and Philip Jennings, eventually gained custody of her son, Tristan. It was later revealed that the management of Ashley Lake's apartments knew about Oliver's criminal past, but failed to check his background thoroughly. They also didn't warn other residents when a series of thefts occurred. When this information became known, Danielle's family sued Ashley Lake's apartments. The Jennings family brought claims for negligent hiring and retention, failure to provide adequate security, and failure to warn residents, among other charges. They sought punitive damages. Following the trial, the jury returned a verdict in excess of $13 million for wrongful death and for pain and suffering. The jury also awarded $2.5 million in punitive damages, an amount later reduced to $250,000 based on the finding that there was no specific intent to harm. According to plaintiff attorneys, the complex's key policy was also flawed. Employees had access to residents' keys, and the lockbox containing the keys to the complex's 240 apartments was often left unsecured. Calvin Oliver is presently incarcerated and serving a life sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Cassandra Cantrell. Fear is a negative and unpleasant feeling. Would anyone want to experience it over and over again? Cassandra Cantrell and her twin brother Rob were the exception. As young children, they couldn't go a day without the scary stories they liked to tell each other in a room with the lights off. Rob was a natural storyteller, or at least he thought he was. Cassandra would scream at every story he told, and he, playing the brave though small man, would sprawl on his bed. They also watched the animated series Scooby-Doo together, and while watching it, they argued over which of the characters in the story would turn out to be a ghost or a vampire in disguise. Cassandra's intuitive guesses were often ahead of her brother, and then he was nervous. Their mother, Mary Smith, although she did not share the same passion as the twins, bought them books by Robert Wall to instill a love of reading in her children. A love for scary stories was not just a childhood hobby, but a lifelong passion that the brother and sister shared. They even collected figurines of villains, and as adults, seriously considered opening a themed store associated with this culture of horror. An interest in horror movies brought Cassandra to the set in 2004, where she got a cameo in a scary movie that, although it didn't become popular, still caused a storm of envy in Rob, and he started asking his sister to make a deal for him. Rob was very happy, but to play, albeit in an episodic role, he was not able to. The head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, and on the set, between him and debuting actress Cassandra, flashed a spark. To make the first step, each of them did not dare, but that all changed during a corporate Halloween party. Cassandra dressed up as Velma from Scooby-Doo, and Colin dressed up as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. For Cassandra, the image of the cartoon character was just an image. But for Colin Dudley, it seemed to be something more. He walked around with a glass of milk all evening, looking at everyone with a glare just as his character did in the movie. And he also talked a lot of quotes from the book. For example, looking at Cassandra with delight, he said, "Beauty invariably caused my only desire to destroy it, for it did not fit at all into our ugly world." Cassandra thought it was a compliment, and they soon began dating, but their relationship didn't last long. Only a couple of months later, Colin found another actress, Rebecca, and started dating her, and later the couple started living together. On August 25, 2020, Cassandra Cantrell disappeared. She, without warning anyone, drove her car away from home in an unknown direction and did not answer phone calls. The police officers were very reluctant to take a report from her mother for a very long time, trying to calm the poor woman down and saying that sometimes children grow up and don't always warn their parents when they go out with friends. But Mary Smith was sure that something terrible had happened, and maybe if the lazy cops would finally start working, she would still have a chance to see her daughter alive. The search for Cassandra did not begin until 2 days later, and on the third day, the police found her car under a bridge, not in the most favorable area. Also, to add to the bad news, the car was unlocked and the keys were inside. It was impossible to understand what Cassandra was doing here. This place was considered a neighborhood of homeless people, where, with frequent frequency, the police found their bodies killed in a domestic fight or died of an overdose of illegal drugs. The officers had to go around the neighborhood questioning a lot of homeless people who, at the sight of the police, tried to get away for a while, but it was all to no avail. None of them had seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car showed up there. It was hard to expect anything else from the residents who lived under the bridge and drank alcohol all day long. The detective involved in the search for Cassandra had requested her cell phone billing, as he was instructed to do, but from experience, he was sure it would get him nowhere, and so it did. The signal showed that the phone was in the nearest body of water to the bridge, which meant that the detectives would not be able to recover it and get the information they needed. Nevertheless, a team of divers began searching the coastal area, and before they did so, standing on the shore, they picked up rocks from the ground and threw them into the water, testing how far they could throw the phone. Cassandra's mother said that her missing daughter's phone case was decorated with rhinestones, which meant it would not be difficult to find. Indeed, the phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not in the water. This things was presented to her mother as good news, but the poor woman did not feel any better. She seemed to have gotten used to the idea that her daughter was dead, and the only thing she wanted was for her body to be found and for this nightmare of uncertainty to end. Cassandra, as it seemed to her mother, despite her already realized age, was not married and did not even meet anyone. It was understandable that she had gotten pregnant by a man, but Mary had no information about the father of the child. Although, again from the words of her mother, her daughter very often corresponded with someone and called, but the phone number of her interlocutor, for some reason, was not recorded in the daughter's book, and the mother, of course, did not remember the numbers. She just noticed that it is quite strange to communicate so often with a person and not write down his number. Cassandra could not keep their relationships in absolute secrecy, and there should be at least one friend with whom Cassandra shared her secrets, and especially if those secrets were related to pregnancy. Such a friend was found, and in a conversation with police officers, she revealed that Cassandra had rekindled her relationship with her former boyfriend, Colin Dudley. Yes, their past relationship in 2004 was short-lived, and besides, it's been 15 years since their breakup. It is strange in general that after so much time, they remembered each other. As it turned out, Colin himself came out to Cassandra, with whom he once worked on a movie set in 2014. He found Cassandra on Facebook, wrote some warm words, and confessed that just recently his father died, with whom his wife, Rebecca, had a difficult relationship, and so he had no one to share his grief with. Cassandra, purely because of friendly motives, decided to meet and talk to the ex-boyfriend to calm him down. But the friendly meeting turned into something more. Since 2014, Colin began to live literally on two families, where Cassandra was in the status of mistress. When the young woman found out that she was pregnant, she did not want to inform Colin Dudley because every time she wanted to admit it to him, she recalled their conversation, where Colin said that he absolutely did not want children and that he was very happy about Rebecca being infertile. The news that he might have a daughter or son could destroy a real family, and Cassandra didn't want to hurt her lover, so she kept the news a secret. Meanwhile, her belly was growing, and it was impossible to hide it under the oversized sweaters, and in order for Colin not to guess anything, Cassandra stopped seeing him. But she couldn't hide it for long, and if she lied about having another boyfriend, it would hurt Colin and cause them to break up. Cassandra decided that the bitter truth was better than a sweet lie, so she told Colin over the phone that she was expecting a child with him. Colin was silent for a while, and then he finally said that he was delighted to hear the news. It sounded very strange, but Cassandra concluded that Colin was genuinely pleased. The detective arrived at Colin's house, knocked on the door, and his wife opened it. Deciding that it wasn't quite ethical to talk about a missing mistress in the presence of Colin's legal wife, the detective introduced himself as an old friend of Dudley's. Colin came out immediately, shut the door behind him, and walked away from the house with the detective. though the latter hadn't even introduced himself yet. It was as if he had been waiting for this meeting. "Thank you for not making your credentials public in front of Rebecca. You're a man of honor, a true officer. My compliments to you," Colin spoke in short sentences. "I heard Cassandra is missing. It's weird, bloody weird. I can't even guess where. She might have gone. She told me she'd had a big fight with her brother and was really worried about it. I advised her to stop by and make up with him. I don't know if she listened to me or not." That Cassandra and Rob had been in a fight, the detective knew. Rob had told him about it himself. It was nothing serious, just a family misunderstanding. But nevertheless, Cassandra's twin brother had been very upset about it because the day she disappeared, Cassandra had called him and wanted to come and talk to him. But his proud brother had refused, and now he blamed himself for it. If his sister had come to see him that day, she wouldn't have disappeared. "You know, officer, I'm not the nicest person. I think you realize that. Dating my ex-girlfriend in secret from my wife and for such a long period of time. I'm sure I'll be punished for it in the next world, but the human heart doesn't decide who you fall in love with. In 2014, my father died. He literally hated Rebecca with all his soul, and the feeling was mutual, but he really liked Cassandra. He often remembered her, reproached me for the fact that we broke up with her almost immediately after Christmas. We often fight with our parents, accusing them of not understanding, and then it turns out that it's us, their children, who don't understand, and it hurts. My father was right, of course, and after he died I just wanted to fulfill one of his wishes, and so I resumed my relationship with Cassandra. Rebecca needed to be broken up with. It was a conversation I kept putting off, you know. This family stuff sucks you dry, so I kept stalling. I've been living a double life for 5 years. It was hell. I had to make excuses for coming home late all the time to hide it. I'd tell her about some fictitious business trips and even bought a fishing rod, even though I hated fishing, a stupid pastime. And I'd tell Rebecca I was going to the lake while I went to Cassandra's before coming home. I'd buy fish at the supermarket for extra convincing, and Rebecca would bake it in the oven, and I'd eat it, even though the smell of fish makes me sick. The detective said, "Did you know Cassandra was pregnant?" Dudley replied in surprise, "Pregnant by whom?" The detective then explained, "I don't have that information, but she told a close friend of hers that it was from you." Dudley affirmed that. "That can't be true. She's been adamantly refusing to see him lately, and he understand her and can't blame her for that. Naturally, she was tired of being in the background and wanted a family, which unfortunately he couldn't give her. He guessed that the reason she refused to see him was because she had found someone else." The detective asked Colin when he last saw Cassandra. Colin claimed that the last time he saw her was about 3 or 4 months ago. This was not Colin's last encounter with the detective. Even though Cassandra's phone, which was lifted from the bottom of the pond and could not be recovered, the police requested the details of the calls of the missing person, and it turned out that most likely the unsigned number about which her mother told her belongs to Colin Dudley. Most often, Cassandra called him, and even on the day of her disappearance, they called each other. In addition, on that day, the police received CCTV footage from the train station near the bridge where Cassandra's abandoned car had been found, and on it they saw a strange man who stood out in the crowd of passengers on the platform. He wore a long cloak, gloves, his face was hidden in a scarf, and a hat was placed on his head, the sides of which covered his eyes. It was impossible to make out the face, but the detective said that the man's gait reminded him very much of Colin Dudley. As for the hat, it was almost identical to the one worn by Alex from A Clockwork Orange. After continuing to follow the strange man through the CCTV cameras, the detectives noticed that he literally went into the cafe for a few minutes, then came out of there and went towards the parking lot where he got into his car and drove away. During all this time, the stranger never showed his face, but they could see the license plate number of the car in which the stranger got into, and the car belonged to Colin Dudley. A unit was sent to his house with a search warrant. The detectives had initially believed that Cassandra was alive and in the basement of Dudley's house. At first, there was no evidence of a murder at Colin's house. However, in the closet, they found the very hat that Colin was trying to cover himself with. They then went down to the basement, but Cassandra was not there, nor was there any evidence of the crime. However, the service dog, trained to search by the scent of blood, barked as it sniffed the couch, which was already a very alarming sign. Colin assured the police that he had done nothing illegal and that they simply had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to pin the crime on him, an innocent man. The detective interviewed his wife, who was shocked at what was going on in their home, the accusations against her husband, and the fact that she had been deceived for years. When the detective asked her if her husband was capable of murder, she answered in the negative after thinking about it for a long time. The evidence found against Colin was not enough to put him in jail, which made Rob and Mary Smith very angry. The detective was just throwing up his hands. Colin was called in for questioning again, and he thought carefully about the crime, as he had an alibi for all the allegations on the morning of August 25th at 6:30 a.m. Colin visited a hardware store where he purchased household cleaning chemicals and trash bags, and the store's cameras confirmed this. However, the large trash bags overshadowed this situation. Colin then received a text message from Cassandra that she was almost at his house, but he immediately deleted the message. But it remained in the cell phone carrier's memory, and the police got it from the call and message dump. Also, according to their cell phone billing, the couple did not leave the house that morning for several hours. Colin then turned off his phone but left his mistress's phone on, most likely by accident, and the police saw the entire path of his movements, including where he was seen on the station's CCTV cameras. As the police already knew, after the cafe where he was probably recovering from the murder by washing up in the toilet, Colin got into his car and drove to the pond where he had dumped Cassandra's phone, where the last signal from the cell phone had been received. It was now necessary to search for Cassandra's body, and the police, in order to accurately track the route, seized a GPS tracker from Colin's car. The device completely replicated the movement of Cassandra's cell phone signal, but there was new evidence in the case based on his movements. The next day, the cops retraced his path that went through the woods, and there, in a ravine, they spotted a huge trash can tied with ropes. All the ground around it was covered in blood, and it became clear what was in the container. By then, it had been a month since the murder, and identifying the body was difficult. The police were helped by Cassandra's tattoo, which was described in the search notes. Colin was apprehended the same day and charged with murder. Forensics conducted a forensic examination and indicated that death was caused by a fractured skull due to blunt force trauma. During the examination of the basement of the Dudley house, the police found traces of blood that could not be completely cleaned. Rebecca knew nothing about the murder, as she spent all day in another part of the house, from which no noise in the basement could be heard. She also confirmed that Colin never wanted children, and his story about her infertility was just a fiction, which the police took as a motive for the crime. During the trial, due to the lack of witnesses and physical evidence, such as the murder weapon, it was impossible to convince the jury that the murder was committed by Colin Dudley. Then the court made a deal with the killer that if he pleaded guilty, he would get a lesser sentence. Colin was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and her brother, who still felt guilty that he had not agreed to meet with his sister before her death, were very upset because the killer would most likely live to see the moment when he could go free. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Angie Hausman. On November 18, 1993, Angie Hausman, a 9-year-old girl from St. Louis, Missouri, disappeared after getting off her school bus just a few hundred meters from her home. Angie, born on February 18, 1984, had never known her biological father, as he had left the family before she was born. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother married a man named Ronald, and they had a son together. Angie got along well with her stepfather and adored her little brother. Angie was an easygoing child who always sought to make friends with those around her. She lived in a quiet suburb of St. Louis and attended an elementary school located just over a mile from her home. She usually took a bus from the nearest stop, and her parents felt relatively safe letting her go there alone, as the stop was only a few hundred meters from their home. Angie typically walked to the bus stop with neighborhood kids after school, and they were watched by several parents from their windows along the way. On the day of her disappearance, Angie finished school around 3 p.m. and took the school bus to her stop with a few neighborhood kids. They walked together towards their homes, but the other children lived closer to the bus stop, leaving Angie alone halfway. When Angie didn't arrive home after about half an hour, her parents began to worry. They went out and walked along the route between their house and the bus stop, talking to other kids from the same school and neighbors who usually kept an eye on the children. However, no one had seen Angie. Angie's parents and their friends quickly initiated a search, scouring the area along the route from the bus stop to their home. As darkness fell, they decided to call the police. Officers immediately joined the search, considering the cold weather and the recent attempted abduction of an 11-year-old girl in a nearby area just 10 days prior. The police used K9 units, which picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop, but lost it roughly halfway to her house, suggesting that she may have gotten into a vehicle at that point. Helicopters with thermal sensors were also deployed, but they found no trace of the girl or her belongings. On the first day of the search, no clues were found. By the following morning, the police sought assistance from the media. The police department was inundated with over 300 calls, necessitating the hiring of more than 20 additional officers, including closely examining Angie's stepfather, who denied any involvement and consented to a lie detector test. They also found Angie's biological father, who had never had any contact with his daughter, but had been observed driving by their house multiple times, watching Angie play outdoors. The FBI became involved on the third day, and the police department allocated even more officers to the investigation, realizing that Angie must have encountered something horrible. She just couldn't have survived on the streets in such cold weather. At one point, the police received a lead about a possible suspect. Someone reported a strange man slowly driving a blue sedan in Angie's neighborhood. His description matched the account of a girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction just 10 days before Angie's disappearance. Investigators decided to create a composite sketch of this person. It was featured in the news, and volunteers distributed thousands of flyers, but the identity of this man remained unknown. Soon, the girl's disappearance made it to national television, attracting even more leads. Police diligently examined each one, but none brought them closer to finding Angie. Due to the heightened attention to this case, psychics quickly got involved, calling Angie's home and sharing their alleged visions. One of them claimed that the girl was alive and even specified a location where she was being held, a large national park 25 miles from Angie's home. However, detectives paid no attention to their words. A $10,000 reward was also offered for any information about Angie's whereabouts, leading to an increase in tips. During the investigation, detectives uncovered a pretty disturbing fact. A few days before her disappearance, Angie told her teacher that she was planning to go on a nature trip with her uncle. The catch was that there was no uncle, and her parents had no idea what their daughter meant by that. Investigators considered the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor prior to the incident and referred to him as her uncle in the conversation with her teacher. However, they didn't find anything about this mysterious man in the following days. Detectives were unable to make any headway in the case until November 27th, 9 days following Angie's disappearance, when a significant breakthrough occurred. A hunter contacted the police after discovering a human body in the woods upon arriving at the national park. The police were met with a gruesome and disturbing scene when they reached the location. They found the body of a girl, completely naked, tied to a tree with her head fully wrapped in tape, leaving only her nose exposed. Handcuffs bound her hands. In close proximity to the site, a bag was found containing items that quickly led the police to identify the body as Angie's. The bag held her personal belongings, including notebooks bearing her name. The body was handed over to medical examiners, revealing even more shocking details. As soon as they removed the tape from her head, experts found a piece of underwear in her mouth. They also determined that the girl had died just a few hours before the discovery, meaning she had been kept alive for 9 days and then taken to this location where she froze to death. Experts had concluded that the victim had suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted. Forensic analysts carefully examined all items found at the crime scene and managed to find a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They tried to find matches in the database and among several suspects, but it led to no leads. After the discovery of the body, the police dedicated even more resources to the investigation. Local residents were shocked by such cruelty and feared for their children, escorting them everywhere, meeting them at bus stops, and not letting them out of their sight for a moment. Just a few days after Angie's discovery, their concerns heightened even further. On December 1st, a 10-year-old girl named Casey disappeared. She lived in another town only 10 miles from Angie's house. Casey had asked her mother if she could visit her friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but she had never reached their house. Casey vanished on the way, and the police couldn't locate her. Detectives began to fear that they might have a serial killer on their hands. They didn't rule out the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, but they had no evidence supporting this theory. 10 days later, Casey's body was found in St. Louis. She was wrapped in 2 bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain, with the cause of death being multiple severe blows to the head. Detectives couldn't find any clues that would lead them to the killer. Moreover, they started to doubt that the same person who killed Casey was responsible for Angie's death. The nature of these crimes was noticeably different, leading them to consider the possibility of dealing with 2 different murderers in the same month. Detectives identified the man who had attempted to abduct a girl a few days before Angie's disappearance. He turned out to be 37-year-old Gary, who often came to St. Louis for work. He was immediately checked for involvement in the 2 murders, but the man had a solid alibi. He wasn't in the city during the disappearances of Angie and Casey. Although, during the investigation, he admitted to assaulting 4 other girls and eventually received a 5-year prison sentence. In February of the following year, detectives had found a breakthrough when they discovered Casey's body. Tire tracks were found nearby, and their photos were handed over to experts who determined that the tracks were left by a pickup truck widely used by a popular car rental company. Armed with this information, detectives interviewed residents in Casey's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen a pickup from this company, given that these vehicles were covered with vibrant brand logos that were easily distinguishable from others. The detectives got lucky. One woman told them that she had seen the pickup from this company near her neighbor's house about a week after Casey's disappearance. Police quickly discovered that there was a woman living with her partner and brother. She claimed that none of them had rented such a pickup and they had no connection to this case. But detectives didn't rush to believe her. They obtained a search warrant for the house and found blood traces belonging to Casey in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, had rented the pickup. Initially, he denied everything, but when confronted with the existing evidence, he finally confessed. According to his account, Casey had knocked on his door, wanting to invite his nephews to go to the street with her. He invited her into her house, took her to the basement, and attempted to assault her. When she screamed, he struck her with a heavy object and covered the body with bed sheets. After the murder, Thomas went to work, and upon his return, his sister informed him that she had seen the body in the basement. However, she added that she didn't want to know what happened and demanded to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Casey remained in the basement for a whole week because active searches were underway, and Thomas was afraid to move her. When things calmed down a bit, he rented the pickup, took the body to St. Louis, and left it there. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death, but he died in prison from illnesses several years later. In connection to Angie's case, he denied any involvement, leading detectives to conclude that these crimes were indeed unrelated. The investigation hit another standstill for many months, with fewer and fewer leads coming in. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge: the expiration of the monetary reward for information, raising concerns about a decline in public assistance. However, an unexpected turn came in 2001 when a businessman in the community donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This generous amount of money, one of the largest at the time, led to a massive influx of tips for the police. But unfortunately, all of these leads proved to be dead ends. This continued until 2001, when detectives received a call from a prison inmate named Corey Fox, who confessed to over 10 murders, including Angie Hausman's. Detectives rushed to speak with him, and Fox recounted how he and his friend abducted her from the street, keeping her captive in his house for several days. Initially, the criminals planned to demand a ransom, but concerns about potential identification led them to choose murder. To the surprise of detectives, Fox provided many accurate details, such as tying her to a tree, even specifying that his accomplice was using her underwear as a gag. However, discrepancies arose when questioned about how they restrained her hands. Fox claimed they used plastic handcuffs, whereas in reality, they used iron ones. Detectives also found out that Fox couldn't have committed some of the murders he confessed to. Police concluded that he likely fabricated parts of his confession, possibly drawing information from extensive news coverage on Angie Hausman's case. In the summer of 2002, another event reignited attention on Angie's case. In a different area of St. Louis, an unknown man abducted a 6-year-old girl from her home and killed her. Police initially considered the possible connection to Angie's case, but it turned out otherwise. The perpetrator was apprehended just a few hours later. It was a neighbor who confessed during interrogation. Several more years passed until 2007, when detectives decided to revisit the case. Reviewing the documents, they noticed a peculiar detail. Shortly after discovering Angie's body, police noticed a parked car nearby, with a man named Roger Martin inside. When questioned about his presence, Roger claimed he came to the area for hunting. However, upon a brief inspection of his car, the police officer found no hunting gear. This led the new detective team to take a closer look at Roger, discovering his criminal record for offenses against children. Moreover, he had assaulted one of his victims near the location where Angie's body was found. Remarkably, all of these crimes occurred before Angie's death, and this information was in the database. But during that time, the police did not thoroughly investigate Roger, prompting the new detective team to start from scratch. Roger was called in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, insisting he was near the location by chance. Roger added that during the time the girl was left there, he was still at work, although the police couldn't confirm this alibi. Despite a 9-hour interrogation, detectives couldn't reach any conclusive results. They took Roger's fingerprints, comparing them with the one left on the tape from the victim's head. Experts determined they didn't match, leading to Roger's release. While the police refrained from ruling him out as a suspect, they lacked substantial evidence to hold him. There was no progress in the case until 2018, when the St. Louis Police Department formed a dedicated task force. The new detectives aimed to re-examine all existing evidence with significant advances in technology since '93, hoping to uncover new leads. The detectives focused on 3 key pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, tape from Angie's head, and her underwear used to silence her. Despite repeated attempts since '93, experts struggled to find the perpetrator's DNA on them. Undeterred, they decided to re-examine these items with modern technology. Firstly, they attempted to find DNA on the handcuffs, but it was quite challenging as they were almost entirely covered in the victim's blood. They then turned to the tape from Angie's head, encountering another issue. When they opened the box containing this evidence, they found that the tape had literally disintegrated over the years. Finally, they examined the underwear, despite having little hope for this particular evidence, as it had been in the victim's mouth for several hours, potentially erasing any foreign DNA. They pursued it as a last resort. Employing state-of-the-art technology, they meticulously inspected every inch of the underwear, and at last, there was a breakthrough. A tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA was discovered, sufficient for analysis. Experts confirmed the DNA belonged to a male, immediately uploading it to the FBI database. In such cases, it's pretty common not to find any matches, requiring additional efforts to identify the person. However, luck was on the detective's side this time. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a full match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox had never come to the police radar regarding Angie's case, but his criminal history was substantial. Earl first landed behind bars during his military service in 1982 in Germany. He had a part-time job as a babysitter until 4 girls reported that he had sexually assaulted them. Earl received an 8-year prison sentence in the USA and was discharged from the Army. After serving only 3 years, he was released early and relocated to St. 4 years later, Earl was arrested again when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Despite the charges being dropped due to insufficient evidence, his arrest violated the terms of his parole, leading to an additional year in prison. Upon his release in '92, he resettled in St. Louis, where his relatives lived. A year later, he seemingly abducted and killed Angie, but we'll delve into that shortly. In 2002, Earl faced another arrest for running a major anonymous internet platform where predators shared materials depicting child abuse. The FBI had been investigating him for a while, and Earl took the bait when an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl contacted him. Earl expressed intentions to make her his slave, sent money for a bus ticket, and showed up at the agreed meeting place. Instead of a girl, Earl encountered armed FBI agents, resulting in his arrest. On his computer, they discovered 45,000 photos of child abuse, along with evidence that he was the mastermind behind the perverse platform. This information led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the country's largest operations against pedophiles. In 2003, Earl was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but when his term ended, a judge refused to release the offender, using a legal loophole allowing the detention of individuals deemed a serious threat to children. As a result, he remained behind bars, and in 2019, his DNA matched the sample from Angie Hausman's case. Detectives went to prison to speak with him. However, Earl denied his involvement and promptly asked for a lawyer. The police recognized that the man had little chance of winning the case in court, given the presence of his DNA, but they decided to try something else. Investigators reached out to Earl's lawyer, stating they would seek the death penalty for Angie's murder. However, if the perpetrator confessed, the prosecution would abandon the death penalty in favor of a life sentence. Apparently aware that he would likely lose the case, Earl agreed to the deal. Detectives returned to the prison, where he provided his version of events. It's worth noting that some parts of his story sounded outright implausible, but the crucial thing for investigators was the confession to the murder. Earl claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving through the area where his mother and sister lived. His car stalled in the middle of the road, and while he was trying to figure out what was wrong with it, a school bus pulled up and several kids got off. They all went into their houses, except for one girl, Angie. According to Earl, when she approached him, they had a brief chat, and he noticed she looked freezing. He offered her a ride in his car, and as he claimed, she agreed. He then took Angie to Burger King, fed her, and brought her to his home, where he sexually assaulted her for several days. After some time, he decided to get rid of Angie, took her to the location where her body would later be found, and tied her to a tree. Allegedly, she was still alive at that moment. Detectives doubted the truthfulness of certain parts of this story. Angie clearly couldn't agree to go anywhere with a stranger, especially considering she only had a short distance to walk home. Investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Earl's story. He claimed the car stalled, but as soon as Angie approached, the car surprisingly started again. More likely, the perpetrator noticed Angie and immediately decided to abduct her. He could have lured her into the car with some lies or even threats. It appeared much more realistic than Earl's version. Nevertheless, detectives obtained what they needed: the confession to the murder. In August 2020, he appeared before a judge who sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Unfortunately, Angie's mother did not live to see this moment. She passed away from cancer in 2016. Her husband, Ronald, told reporters that Earl should have been tried for 2 murders because he held him responsible for his wife's death. After losing her daughter, she lost all interest in life and essentially died. As for Earl, his story didn't end with the verdict. The prosecutor wanted to review the case of sexual abuse involving 2 7-year-old girls, for which the offender faced no consequences, serving just a year in prison for parole violation. Police reached out to one of his victims, now an adult, asking her to testify against Earl. The man, already destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars, admitted his guilt, and he was sentenced to an additional 10 years in prison. After the sentence was announced, his victim spoke in court. She expressed that despite Earl's heinous crime, she would lead a happy and fulfilling life while he rightly fades away in prison. The Abril Perez case unveils layers of tragedy and mystery, set against the backdrop of a Mexican night where stars shine brightly, yet secrets linger in the shadows. This story revolves around Abril, whose life became a series of unfortunate events. The case progressed slowly. It took months before the first suspects were captured. The Secretary General of the Mexican Security Council, Omar Garcia, announced that on March 5, 2020, 2 individuals connected to this crime were detained. He made it clear that all detainees had been identified and were under investigation. The initial suspects were Juan Carlos Rodriguez Ortiz, the car driver, and Rodolfo Daniel Bandera Sandoval, also known as Changa Leon, who was identified as the shooter. These 2 became prime suspects post their arrests. Abril's family insisted on Juan Carlos's arrest, believing him to be the crime's orchestrator. Following an attack on Abril, judges who had initially freed Juan returned to work but faced suspension again due to public outrage. After 7 months, on October 28, 2 more suspects were detained: Oscar, known as El Oso, and Alejandro, known as El Corral. El Corral was arrested with his girlfriend, Magda Carina. In her bag were found 3 packets of illegal substances alongside a weapon and weighing scales for narcotics. El Oso was apprehended at his home, where police discovered 182 doses of illegal substances, guns, and 300 rounds of large-caliber ammunition. These detainees belonged to a gang led by Juan Carlos Maldon, also known as Juan Balta, who was later arrested too. Known as a trusted leader within one of Mexico City's most notorious gangs, he was found in possession of significant quantities of illegal substances during his capture. Court records indicated that Juan Balta met Juan Carlos while in prison, offering protection for money. After his release, Juan continued receiving financial aid from Balta. It is believed that Juan Carlos sought Balta's assistance to arrange the murder of 2 people who threatened his ex-wife's life. Abril Perez's tale is equally heart-wrenching. Born in Monterrey in 1971, Abril grew up under challenging circumstances with her mother Maria del Suero, tirelessly working to secure the best education in life for Abril and her siblings, Javier and Ana. Despite hardships, Abril excelled academically with a clear goal: achieving financial independence through education. As she matured into an intelligent and altruistic woman with notable leadership qualities, she pursued higher education rigorously. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Nuevo León and later acquired her master's degree in business from Monterrey Institute of Science and Technology. Her career flourished in digital sales, where she rose swiftly to hold an executive director position at Bilbao Bank in America by the early 1990s. During this prosperous phase in her career, Abril met Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, a driven entrepreneur born on November 11, 1968. Sharing many academic accolades and professional aspirations, Juan also graduated from Monterrey Institute like Abril and furthered his studies at prestigious institutes such as the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. Both driven by ambition and intellect, quickly grew close both personally and professionally. They collaborated on several projects while nurturing friendships within shared social circles. Over time, their camaraderie blossomed into love, leading them down the aisle together in 1994. Together, they spearheaded numerous successful ventures, including Pag Mobile and Plascom online stores. Their combined efforts contributed significantly towards establishing DM Store as a leading e-commerce entity in Mexico by 1999. The couple's life appeared to be a genuine fairy tale. Both achieved remarkable successes in their careers and were blissful together. Their joy amplified in 2001 with the birth of their first daughter, Ana Cecilia. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Juan Carlos Jr., and in 2005, another son, Julio Andres, was born. Despite her busy schedule, Abril always made time for her children, personally attending to their needs and school. Her dedication earned admiration from everyone around her. Juan Carlos was also seen as an exemplary father. Together, they cultivated an ideal family that many envied. But the reality was different. During that period, the family faced substantial challenges, suffering from Juan's short temper. He had a volatile nature and could unleash his anger on anyone around him. Initially, it began with verbal abuse. Juan made Abril uncomfortable with hurtful insults. Gradually, the situation worsened as he started using physical violence, regularly beating his wife. Abril tried to conceal it from friends and family because she believed staying with Juan would secure the best future for their children. By 2009, others began suspecting something was wrong at home due to Abril's evident depression and visible bruises. However, despite inquiries about a possible divorce, she insisted on staying with her husband. The situation continued to get worse up until 2014. Despite Juan Carlos reaching the pinnacle of his career in 2014 as an influential figure in the Amazon retail industry in Mexico, turmoil persisted within the family. By 2015, his new role as Amazon director necessitated a move to Mexico City, a change that did not solve their problems. The abuse continued daily while he maintained a facade of being a loving husband and father publicly. Juan Carlos often shared social media posts calling Abril the love of his life, while privately controlling and accusing her of infidelity, even hiring a detective to prove it. His career soared while his marriage crumbled before his eyes. By 2018, tensions between him and Abril were unbearable. Despite her efforts to maintain family unity after a trip to Monterrey for Christmas celebrations with her family in 2018, an incident made her realize she could no longer continue living with him. During this visit, and driven by irrational rage, Juan strangled Abril after receiving misleading photos from a private investigator, falsely implying an affair with a colleague. On January 4, 2019, Abril finally decided enough was enough and filed for divorce. Early one morning, not long after this decision, while asleep, Abril awoke from severe blows to her head inflicted by Juan wielding a baseball bat, thinking initially that perhaps something catastrophic like ceiling collapse must have occurred, only soon recognizing it was indeed her husband assaulting her maliciously. Attempting desperately but unsuccessfully fleeing, whilst calling out loud, attracting attention, ultimately saved by eldest son, then 16 years old, who intervened preventing further harm, whisking mother off hospital, seeking urgent medical treatment given extensive injuries sustained. Subsequently, following these harrowing events, Juan engaged heavily online, alleging numerous accusations against estranged wife, including infidelity, theft, alongside bizarre claims wounded by stabbing. even posting graphic images incriminatingly, albeit deceptively manipulative, stirring confusion, disbelief, widely questioning veracity, credibility, amidst alarmingly strange, unsupported assertions. Curiously culminating contradictorily, stating sensationally, considerably fabricated declaration, preposterously claiming own premature demise, astonishingly baffling, many, since plainly alive, ative concerned, reflecting potential underlying complexities, yet conspicuously revealing, tragically profound adverse impact, profoundly affecting gravely matters, warranting earnest consideration, reflective deliberation, insight, acknowledging persistently injustice, undeniably suffered, profoundly consequentially induced, primarily generated, systematically, intentionally premeditated abusive conduct behavior, regrettably adversely experienced, enriched perspective, understanding eloquently articulated herein, professionally gravitating, empathetic recognition, importance, human, judicious appreciating, jointly, responsibly, collectively, fostering principled integrity, social positive transformation, conducive, harmonious, peaceful, equitable coexistence, pivotal, quintessential, consequential, imperative. After being discharged from the hospital, Abril immediately filed a police report against her husband. Authorities granted her custody of her 2 children. Juan Carlos was ordered to pay alimony of 6,000 Mexican pesos per month, about $350. However, this amount did not cover the costs of raising 2 young children. Despite these financial difficulties and the fear of her husband, Abril decided to start a new chapter in her life and was determined not to be discouraged for the sake of her children. Subsequently, Abril and her children moved to Monterrey. From there, she observed the trial against Juan Carlos and filed for divorce. After enduring such a traumatic experience and constant abuse, she began rethinking her life decisions. She joined a Christian group dedicated to protecting families and started working as a divorce counselor. Her goal was to create an organization that would help women who had been abused like she had been. Thanks to such an organization, Abril herself managed to heal and even forgave her ex-husband. While she was striving to rebuild her life, the lawsuit against Juan continued. After 9 long months following the attack, authorities charged him with attempted murder. The case went to court where Judge Federico Mask decided on an informal arrest for Juan. Thus, he was taken into custody for several weeks. However, Juan appealed the verdict, and on November 3, 2019, another judge, named Hector Jimenez, reclassified the crime. He opined that photographs from the hospital and testimonies from Abril and her son were insufficient to prove Juan's guilt definitively. Moreover, he believed that Juan did not intend to kill Abril, otherwise he would have succeeded. According to the judge, the baseball bat used in the attack was not considered a weapon suitable for murder. Consequently, the case no longer qualified as femicide, and Juan's preliminary arrest was canceled. There were only a few hearings left in Juan's trial. The outcome remained uncertain, causing increasing anxiety and frustration for Abril, her family, and friends. Desperately seeking relief, Abril wrote a letter to the judge pleading for consideration of her fears for her safety. She firmly believed Juan posed a real threat, but received no response to her plea. Following this development, Juan Carlos was released from custody and began actively fighting for custody of his children. Abril had no choice but to leave Monterrey and travel to Mexico City frequently for all hearings related to their case, and subjected her children to psychological evaluations because Juan Carlos claimed she had turned them against him. This supposedly explained why they wanted nothing more than distance from their father forever again. A week before crucial hearing session date drew near, the crucial one, Abril gathered 3 kids, telling them how much love felt, pushing each towards dreams fulfillment while urging strength needed forgiveness. Side note, relatable indeed. On November 25th, in compliance throughout with ex's instructions avoiding legal tangles, separating loved ones altogether, arrived Mexico City, intended meeting, taking place same day when thousands, women marked street celebration, Anti-Gender Violence Day, globally impactful symbol, indeed reflecting broader struggle ongoingly seen, meanwhile yes, continuing relentless fight, march, so to speak, right? Time passed until March 19th next year, bringing turning point judicial-wise, canceling previous handling actions, revisiting the settling attempted murder. Abril reinstated following collective push, relatives prosecution line formal appeals requiring plus subsequent petitions array highlighting repetition involving case assuring dominion. Finally May settled arrests, finalized trio women Solomon rounding elements critical search warrants, altogether findings detailed captured each identified notably care overall, background thoroughness punctuate course interims pan explaining prosecutor touching essence clarifications, juxtaposing initial attempt, comparably then elevating upholding right societal realms, subsequently prompted sweeping comprehensive research, yielding vital breakthrough imperative efforts nearing affirmative closure, integrity bind scrutinizing laying hopper diverse parallel obligations extended Rawls pursuit persistently subsequently engaged recognized alias Shalon loop continued fundamentally. During the interrogation, Rolf, also known as El Shalon, confessed that he was the individual who shot and killed Abril. Ultimately, he pleaded guilty, stating that Juan Carlos had offered him $10,000 to commit the crime. He detailed how Juan Carlos had contacted him while still in pretrial detention. Over the phone, Juan provided Abril's address in Mexico City, along with instructions on how to perform surveillance on her and execute the crime. Furthermore, Juan assured him that a gun would be waiting for him in Monterrey. Rolf recounted going to Monterrey expecting to receive the firearm. However, no one reached out to him for several days. He then returned to his residence in Mexico City and did not hear from Juan Carlos again until Juan's release from prison. Upon his release, Juan contacted Rolf with updated plans. Now wanted Abril killed in Mexico City since he had managed to lure her there. Due to procedural rules, these cases couldn't be consolidated. Thus, they were divided into separate hearings. The initial trial focused solely on Rodolfo Daniel Bendes, the direct perpetrator, and Juan Carlos Rodriguez. Subsequent trials would involve the other accused parties. In August 2022, the first round of court proceedings commenced. During these sessions, the prosecutor's office presented testimonies from 28 witnesses and 14 pieces of expert evidence. Rolf El Shalon detailed how he planned and executed the murder and once again pleaded guilty. On May 19, 2023, the court found Rodolfo Daniel Bendes and Juan Carlos Rodriguez guilty of committing femicide and sentenced them each to 52 years in prison. Additionally, they were ordered to pay 56,000 Mexican pesos, approximately $30,000 in damages. Following their conviction, they were transferred to a pretrial detention center to begin their sentences. The Abril family publicly announced their intention to appeal Rodolfo's sentence. They considered it too lenient, given his direct involvement in her death. Further complicating matters regarding other defendants. In October 2014, a judge decided to split the trials of 4 defendants: Juan Carlos Maldonado, Juan Baldra, Eli Carnal, Amada Viente Rodriguez, and Garcia Alicia Flores, into separate hearings. Prosecutors opposed this decision due to concerns it would prolong the legal process and incur additional costs since each defendant would need to testify multiple times. Abril's tragic fate deeply unsettled not only her family, but also society at large in Mexico. Just when it seemed justice was within reach through these trials, they resumed yet again under distressing circumstances surrounding her demise. According to reconstructed events, after one such court hearing, Abril entered a car with her children and legal counsel en route back home via Monterrey Airport, where an assassin on motorcycle ambushed them at an intersection near their route, opening fire specifically targeting her head, while miraculously sparing most occupants inside, except grazing one's limb incidentally. Despite transporting Abril alive, hospitals' efforts ended vainly, succumbing injuries 6 hours arriving tragic incident shockwaves through community. Especially Javier brother, urgent quest resolve misconceptions pervading suspicions, implicate, released prisoner officially. However, authorities declared unknown identity, intent shooter impeded, qualifying categorization femicide, necessary apprehension sought. That's why this case was classified simply as a murder, and the police launched an investigation to gather all necessary evidence to consider it a femicide. Abril's friend took to social media to discuss the situation, accusing Juan Carlos. This accusation led to her account being deleted. Abril's family feared that this man would go unpunished for his actions. They sought public attention through social media as well. Abril passed away on a day commemorating the fight against gender-based violence. Her death took on added significance because of this. The family organized numerous protests and marches in her honor, demanding justice. Social media users began discussing how Abril had expressed her fear many times and how authorities ignored her pleas for help. Amid their grief and frustration, Abril's family and friends held a funeral in Monterrey with a mass at the Bonito Flores Chapel. Dozens came to extend condolences and honor Abril's memory, also demanding justice. The procession moved to the Pantheon Garden in Los Angeles for the burial. Abril's case highlighted issues around gender-based violence, especially those involving judges releasing men who attacked women. Ex-husband Juan Carlos was released after appeals, which allowed him to bring Abril to Mexico City unimpeded, leading to her death. The Mexican General Prosecutor's Office initiated an investigation against judges Carlos Trillo Rodriguez, Federico Mosa Gonzalez, and Hector Jimenez Lopez for enabling Juan Carlos's release from prison. Members of the former president's party also got involved. Andrés Manuel López Obrador urged the removal of Judge Mosca in the Chamber of Deputies due to his involvement in a controversial case where he freed a doctor accused of disrespecting a patient in a public hospital. Charges were downgraded from femicide to sexual violence, leading to his release. During the scandal surrounding Abril's case on November 29th, Rafael Gara, president of Mexico City's Supreme Court, temporarily suspended all judges involved in Juan Carlos's case. Claudia Sheinbaum, head of government for Mexico City, confirmed an investigation into Abril's case as femicide was underway. If proven that Juan Carlos was responsible, judges involved could face consequences. Local and international media reported that despite evidence against him, Juan was released during legal proceedings. The family announced forming the Voice of Abril, a nonprofit aimed at offering information and support for violence victims. Protests over Abril's death pushed for reclassification against Juan Carlos, so he would face attempted murder charges leading potentially to imprisonment. After being charged, Juan posted online that he wished for justice in resolving Abril's crime and expressed willingness to cooperate with police, while stating conflicts with Abril were not fatal, leading community outrage. His daughter Ana Cecilia publicly accused him of years-long physical and mental abuse towards Abril and their children too, sharing photos purportedly showing Abril hospitalized following an attack by him with a baseball bat, according to herself. Her father was a narcissistic sociopath who got out of prison by bribing officials. A few days later, amidst the ongoing investigation and protests, an arrest warrant was issued for Juan Carlos. Not due to the Abril case, but rather for violating judicial duties. He had been released on the condition he'd visit the police station weekly. However, he failed to comply. Additionally, he missed 2 court hearings. Judge Agustin Monreal Gaspar subsequently revoked his release order. During one hearing, the judge read out a letter from Juan claiming he feared for his life and hence avoided attending the hearings. He mentioned that since Abril's death, both he and his family had received threats, believing that appearing in court could lead to someone seeking revenge on him. Nonetheless, the judge did not accept this as a valid excuse and thus issued an arrest warrant. Juan was also barred from leaving the country. Meanwhile, the investigation pressed on, with authorities determined to uncover the entire truth. As part of their efforts, they came across another letter written by Juan, where he again denied any involvement in Abril's death. He asserted he never wished her harm and had no intent to kill her. He narrated his version of events from that night. According to him, they argued and Abril first picked up a knife and stabbed him in the side. He claimed hitting her with a bat was his first act of self-defense and maintained he never attempted to take her life. Naturally, this letter incensed those present at its reading. None found Juan Carlos's words credible. The investigation pointed towards Juan Carlos as the primary suspect in this matter. Furthermore, police identified at least 7 other individuals implicated in the crime against Abril after analyzing surveillance footage from nearby where these events occurred. The videos depicted 2 cars trailing Abril as she departed from the courthouse. Both drivers were communicating with the individual who ultimately fired the fatal shot at Abril's head. Post-attack footage showed all 3 vehicles speeding away from the scene together. Although identities of those involved were not established at that point, investigators concluded there was strong evidence suggesting Juan Carlos's involvement in orchestrating this crime. Investigators believed that Juan had met these individuals during his time in prison and had compensated one of them to ensure his safety. According to their findings, the people who protected him were released from prison, followed by Juan's release. Subsequently, he allegedly paid them to end Abril's life. Only Juan knew precisely Abril's route to Mexico City because he was the one who requested meeting with her. When this information came to light, no law firm wanted to represent him. Abril's family, friends, and colleagues provided all possible information to the authorities to facilitate his capture. However, a few days later, sources from the country's general prosecutor's office reported that Juan had left Mexico. They indicated that he managed to flee by crossing the border between Mexico and the United States. Mexican authorities promptly contacted Interpol to circulate information about the search for Juan Carlos, and Interpol immediately commenced their search for him. Soon enough, he was wanted by authorities in over 151 countries, determined to locate him at any cost. By late January 2024, there were no new developments in the case. 4 years have passed since Abril's tragic death without any accountability for those responsible for this crime. Her children are now living with her family on the outskirts of Mexico City, clinging to hope that justice will eventually be served. To this day, everyone is asking, where is Juan Carlos? His apprehension remains a top priority for law enforcement agencies. Abril's family has vowed not to cease their fight for justice until he is found and held accountable.